What's up, everybody? I'm Jeremy, and you guys are watching Morphs. I'm going to adjust this real quick here, kind of get this angle a little bit better. All right, there we go. That might be better. Everybody, I want to thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you're new to the channel, please do me a favor, everybody. Hit the subscribe button and hit that notification bell as well, please. Appreciate all the support. It's amazing to see how far we've grown in like a 2 years time span. Absolutely just amazed at how far this channel has grown in that amount of time. Sorry about that. So we have Brian Butler of Altitude Exotics. As I have been told, this man is basically the JKR for you ball python people of the Crested Gecko world. So as my one good friend, and I'm sure we can all kind of guess who this friend was, said, what in the world does this man want to do coming onto a ball python channel? Well, you know what, folks? We're going to find out tonight. And second of all, I also want to learn more about these Crested Geckos are awesome looking. I'm not going to deny it. And I almost want to buy one just because they are cool looking. But I want to find out tonight why these geckos are basically becoming the new ball python, basically in the hobby and industry. They are taking reptile shows over by storm, and I want to find out a little bit more about them tonight. So I hope you guys all enjoy this content. And if you have any questions for Brian himself, make sure you drop them down in the chat there. And if I don't get to them right away, I'll star them, and we will get to them as we can. So let's welcome Brian to the show. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, man? How are you?
I'm doing good, dude. Doing good. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. After my buddy, like I was telling you backstage, after my buddy telling me that you're basically like the JKR of the Crested Gecko world, it made me that much happier that I reached out to you to find out why these awesome looking, I'm going to say lizards. I know they're technically geckos, but geckos, lizards,
It's all the same, yeah.
Yeah. I'm just curious as to why these awesome looking lizards are taking over the reptile industry above all the other options out there. So I'm hoping tonight, by the end of the night, I'm hoping maybe you convince me to want to get one. I don't need the excuse to go buy and invest into another thing, but I'm not gonna lie, they are awesome looking lizards. I want to say hi to a couple people here in the chat. John, what's up? Thanks for tuning in, bro. KMS Reptiles LLC, thank you for tuning in. You're a new face. Thank you very much. Eric, what's going on? Thank you for tuning in. New face as well. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight.
Yeah, KMS is a high-end gecko breeder in his own right. Good friend of mine.
It's good to see all right, awesome. Well, heck, maybe we need to hit them up at some point then too to find out a little bit more about this side of the hobby.
You should.
Kent, what's up, dude? Thanks for tuning in. My brother Danny, what's up, Danny? You probably thought I was lying, dude, but I wasn't lying. I told you. What's up, Danny? I'm glad you're tuning in tonight, brother. Good to see you. I cannot wait to be spending a whole day with you out at Gettysburg Reptile Expo LLC this coming Saturday, folks, on the 18th. It's going to be a blast. Kike, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Yes, everybody, please smash that like. Please. Let's see. He did say, yeah, here we go. There we go. That's where I saw it. Let's see here. We got Locked and Loaded Ball Pythons. Frank, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Yancey Bull, thanks for tuning in as well. New face. It's great to see these new faces in the chat. Absolutely love it. Javi's, I probably butchered that. Javi's Strange Pets, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Jim, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Jason, what's up? Nicole, what's up, sister? Good to see you. Thanks for tuning in. Lindsay, what's up? Thank you very much for tuning in. Let's see here. Tammy, what's going on? Thank you for tuning in. I just saw my phone light up. I'm going to turn that down on the vibrate before it makes noise. The other Jeremy, Third Eye Pythons, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. I will see you at Gettysburg as well, dude. Bryce Scatterfield, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Phil, what's up, brother? All right, we're going to get into the show, everybody. I apologize if I didn't get to you. Ed, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Ed, I will have the specs for where I want the branches and all that stuff for the carpet enclosures for you at Gettysburg. Thank you very much, dude. I appreciate it. So can't wait to actually get to finally meet you in person at Gettysburg. And Javi, yes, please smash that like, everybody. Please smash that like. All right, Brian, we're not a hero, and I got to do this yet quick, too. Hold on. Where is it? There we go. Everybody, those are some of the sponsors of the YouTube channel, so please make sure you go give them all a like and follow and check them out. And we'll do a little bit of promo here from a little bit later on, but I don't want to have Brian just sitting here listening to me jib-jab and all that stuff. Brian, tell us a little bit about yourselves, how you got into the hobby. Why did you pick Crested Geckos?
So I've been breeding since 2009 is when I first got into them. Like a lot of people, I got into this. I've always been a reptile lover. I've always kept, went out, caught frogs and garter snakes and all the things you can find around here in Colorado and kept them as pets. I had a box turtle for a long time growing up.
Okay.
And then, like a lot of people that get into the hobby, I was at Petco and saw one of these geckos. A girlfriend I was dating at the time drugged me into Petco and asked the guy to open the cages so we could look at the animals. And this guy pulled out the coolest looking lizard I've ever seen in my life. And they kind of stuck in my head for a few years until I finally went and got one as a pet. At that point, I'd never even considered that reptile breeding was a thing. I didn't even know it wasn't even something I thought was possible. I remember I had a friend that came over to my house and I was showing her my geckos and she goes, "Oh yeah, I got one of those. My boyfriend's going to get me a male at the next reptile expo and I'm going to breed them." And I was just like, what the hell what was that sentence you just said? Like reptile expo, you're going to breed them? You tell me you can make more of these things? Like, I got to try this, right?
Yes, I do tell.
Yeah. So then you get online and it's morphs and patterns and color mutations. And it was just all downhill from there. I was hooked.
Dude, that's kind of how my story with ball pythons was as well. It's just, I got into the hobby and then I was out of it for a while. Then I got back in. And when I got back in, there was so much more morphs and patterns and stuff to them. It's like, what happened in this short amount of time?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I told you backstage, I know basically absolutely nothing about Crested Geckos. So hopefully by the end of tonight, I'll know a lot more. So tell me, why are Crested Geckos right now such a hot topic at the moment?
So I believe there's two main reasons. They've always been very popular pets because they're so easy to keep. They, they live at room temperature, so you don't need extra heat lamps. They're nocturnal, so you don't need UV lamps. They're similar to ball pythons where you can basically just put them in a box and they'll thrive. Like they need a proper setup, obviously, but compared to a lot of lizards that need UV, like day geckos need UV lights. Hey, Living Wild, that's Paul and Georgina, more good friends of mine. Love those guys.
Oh, awesome.
They don't need UV lights. They don't need heat lamps. They live at room temperature. They're just so easy to keep that they make really, really good, like first-time reptile pets. And then they've really exploded in the last 5 to 7 years because there's been a few new morphs that have come out.
Okay.
And for a long time, crested geckos were kind of seen as like not real reptiles. Like crested gecko people were gecko people. They weren't reptile people. They were very separate. And now it's become a lot more serious of a business where they're reptile people like crested geckos and they breed them like they do other reptiles and specifically go for different morphs and mutations and look at the genetics behind it. For years, it was just, put a couple together and see if something cool comes out. It's just, it's a much more serious part of the reptile world now versus some fringe, they're kind of cute and they make good pets type of thing.
Okay. No, you were saying that they don't require any extra heat and you just need ambient room temperature. Mm-hmm. What kind of temps are you looking at? Like high 70s, low 80s, or?
So these guys actually, unlike most reptiles, heat's dangerous for them. So like high 70s is about the max. They can tolerate into the low 80s, but you're playing with fire at that point. Most people keep them between 72 and 76. I try to keep mine during the summer when I'm trying to boost their metabolism and for a good breeding season, keep them closer to 78. And then during the winter, my breeders, I'll cool down into the low 60s. And the grow outs and the babies I keep heated up all year long so their metabolism stays higher and they grow at a better rate. But these guys, they're very cold tolerant. You have to try to freeze them to death. Like, they're very cold. You can get them down into the high 50s, and it doesn't bother.
Wow.
They quit eating and they don't grow, but they're not like in danger. But the high temperatures, when they start getting up into the 80s, is when they get in danger.
That's just crazy, dude. Like, I think of like just reptiles in general, like that 80-degree mark is like the sweet spot.
Yep.
And that's just
these guys like
it makes,
like I said, it makes it nice because you can just put a tank, decorate a nice tank, and set it right on your dresser, or it's a decorative part of your living room. And they, as long as I always tell people, if you're comfortable, they're comfortable. That's all you have to consider.
That's just kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie, dude. I knew I had been told you could keep them at room temperature, but I didn't know that was actually like the preferred thing to keep them at that temp. That's just nuts. Like, wow. That's just boggling my mind. It really is.
They're such great pets. Like I said, they're so easy to set up and take care of. They make great first-time pets.
Now, the one thing I'd want to ask you is, because I see a lot of them that have the quote-unquote frog butts.
Mm-hmm.
How easy do they drop their tails? Because I've had people telling me that they don't drop their tails that often, that it's, but yet I see a lot of them that have no tails. So I'm just kind of curious as to how often they actually do drop their tails. Is it more when they're babies that it's likely, or adults, or?
You do. So I get a fair amount, not a lot, but some amount of tail drops during breeding because they can get a bit rough with each other.
Okay.
And it does happen during breeding. So that's why a lot of older ones you'll see, especially in larger collections, you get into the older ones and you get less and less tails because they do tend to drop them during breeding. Like I said, not at a huge rate, but that does happen. And a lot of it depends on the geckos. They seem to have very varying personalities. I've got ones that don't seem. I had one when I was like first starting out. My brother was at my house, and I had 20 geckos at the time, and they were this novelty thing because he'd never seen them. So we were looking at them, and I was showing them all. And he closed one of my cages. It was like a Exoterra glass front cage. He closed the door and caught the gecko's tail in it. And we didn't notice. Like, we were leaving. I said, I'll just make sure that one's closed up. He closed it, caught the gecko's tail. We didn't notice. Went out for the night, went to bed. I woke up the next morning, went into my gecko room, and he's still hanging there by his tail. Didn't drop it the whole time, just hung there by his trapped tail. And then I've had other ones where it's like you open their cage and they freak out and start running around and throw their tail because they think they're going to get attacked. Some of them seem like they're just aren't scared of anything. And then the other extreme, like, You'll hear a lot of people say, like, oh, you can't vacuum around them because they'll drop their tails. 95% of the time, that's not true. But you do get some that are so skittish. It's like there's just nothing you can do. They're going to lose the tail. But most of them are in the middle there where it's like as long as you're not yanking on it or messing with them, they'll be fine.
I was going to say that, like, I wasn't sure because, like, I've heard people say basically if you look at them wrong, they'll drop it. And it's just kind of, it's like, if they're that likely to drop, because it boggles my mind too that they don't regenerate their tail like some of the other geckos that there are. So it's like I just kind of wondered why they were so popular if they lost their tail like that and it was that easy. But then, like, if they're kind of a little bit rough on the mating aspect and all that stuff, it kind of makes a little bit more sense now.
I've always thought it's interesting they don't regenerate them too, because a lot of the geckos that are from the same island they're from that are really closely related do regenerate their tails. Like their closest relatives do, but they don't.
Where do they come from naturally?
So they're endemic to a little island called New Caledonia. It's like if Australia's here and New Zealand is here, it's kind of like right up here in the middle.
Okay.
So kind of make a triangle between Australia and New Zealand. It's a little tiny group of islands called New Caledonia. It's a old French territory.
Okay. Actually, you know what? I did hear someone call them New Caledonian geckos. So I guess I should have put two and two together. Yes, that was a kind of a stupid question. I apologize on my part. Danny, Jeremy's getting a gecko for a Star Wars room. If I would get one, it would I don't know if it would go up in the Star Wars room, dude. It might be down in the basement to give the kids a little bit of something to actually like watch. Let's see. There was a Leanne Watson here said, Brian, you're awesome. One of the main reasons we have come as far as we have breeding Cresties. Huge respect for you, or huge respect for what you have achieved. Thank you, Leanne, for tuning in tonight. Let's see here. Tammy says she's been following you for over 3 years.
It's awesome. Thank you.
KMS says your frog butts need love. I give my buddy Danny here at DTMG all sorts of crap about his frog butts and telling him that. And maybe this isn't the right place to say it, but I asked him, it's like, when they lose their tails, is that something where when you sell them, you charge extra to put the tail back on them? Type of deal? I think I might have gave him an idea out of that one. I'm not entirely sure.
Discount if you include the tail but don't stick it back on. It's like a DIY project.
Yeah. Let's see, Danny. Phil says Danny he already has a Yoda doll. It's a baby Yoda, dang it. It's not a doll either. Collectible, guys. Collectible. He has a doll. I don't think it's Danny.
I'm not sure I was properly briefed on the content of this here podcast.
Danny's a wild card. You never know what you're going to get out of him. Let's see here. Javi says they have 1 frog butt and 2 full tails. Okay. Now, go through the process of breeding them. Like, are they difficult to breed? Obviously, like you said, they can get a little rough at times. Do you have to worry about the males or the females killing one or the other?
So very rarely. I've had, I think, in all the years and breedings and everything I've done, I've only had 3 geckos get severely injured from breeding wounds and 1 that passed away. So it's not, they can get rough, but not like that. Like there's other geckos like kahuas and lychees that when they get rough and they don't get along, they will kill each other. These guys they'll bite each other and they're rough, but it's not, you don't normally have to worry about them hurting each other that bad. Breeding's fairly simple. Most people just do pairs. You can do trios together if you want to. You just have to watch them closer to make sure the girls aren't going to beat each other up or they're not being too rough or anything. And the biggest thing to breeding them is giving them a cooling period in the winter. That's like I said, I try and keep my breeding room down in like the high 60s, low 70s during the winter.
Okay.
And that kind of cools them down. It triggers them to stop laying eggs. Give them a good 3-4 months break to kind of rebuild their bodies and fatten up and everything. If you keep them hot year round, they can tend to try and breed year round, and it's really hard on the females. So getting them to breed is very easy, but that's the only real key is making sure they have a nice off period so you don't run them ragged with it.
See, that's interesting, and I'll relate this to like carpet python since they're kind of in that same area. Like with carpets, you cool them down and kind of like you start slowing down on the feeding to get them right. Like that's kind of what sparks off their breeding season is that cooling period. So you're cooling to get them to stop breeding and to calm down a little bit. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of backwards. Most people's breeding season is really kicking in right now as things start to warm up. And then I tend to start a lot later. A lot of people now with their Cresties are getting eggs by January or February, and I really don't start getting full egg production till April or so. And then mine tend to stop laying middle of October into the first couple weeks of November is when I really stop getting eggs.
Okay. Now, how often do they lay eggs throughout the season?
So they lay 2 eggs in a clutch, and they'll lay a clutch anywhere between every 30 to 40 days normally. And at max, you can normally want to get, usually I get 4 to 6 clutches a year. Some geckos you can get 8 to 10 a year if you don't cool them down or they're just really producing heavy. But I usually aim for about 6 clutches a year from each female.
That is very, that's quick. That's
Yeah,
quick reproduction.
they push them out pretty quick, and they'll lay, if you breed them once, you pair them once, they'll lay clutches all year long.
Okay. Now, do you let the males in there with the females the whole time, like you cohab them, or does the males
I
have
do.
their own thing and the females have their own?
I cohab most of them.
Okay.
A lot of it depends on, you have to watch them, and if like the boys, they are boys, and when they are cohabbed with a girl, they tend to not pay attention to food very much. So you have to watch them. If they start getting real skinny, or they'll lose some weight, you want to pull them out and let them sit by themselves for a few months until they start really getting interested in food again. But for the
Okay.
most part, I cohab mine, and just like I said, every time I feed them and go through, you just do a visual inspection. If any of the girls are looking a little skinny or raggedy, or the boys are looking, or they're beating each other up too bad, you just have to always keep an eye on them so you can address it if you need to.
Okay. See, that's interesting. Like, so the males will actually go off food a little bit too?
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, they eat enough. Like it's like they maintenance feed themselves. Like they won't starve themselves to death, but especially like if you breed males young, they stay small for a long time. It's real
okay.
hard to get them. Like if you breed them, for females, breeding weight's 45 grams and 2 years old. For males, I usually wait till they're 40 grams, and age really doesn't matter very much with males. If they can get there in a year, then I breed them at a year. But you can breed them as young as 25, 30 grams technically. But I've learned if you do that, they're going to be at 30, 35 grams for years. They'll eventually
Ooh.
put on some more weight, but it takes them a long time. It just stunts their growth because they don't care anymore. They figured out what they want to do in life, and that's all they do.
They found that one thing that made them happy, and that's all that mattered. What's up, Stephen and Courtney? Thanks for tuning in. Before we go on here, we are at 37 people in the chat. Everybody, do me a favor, hit that like button, please. Definitely, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, please. And on top of it, we need to thank the sponsors of this week's episode. So I want to thank my buddy Nathan here at Infinite Possible Pythons. Oh, let me get Steven's little thing there down. I want to thank Nathan at Infinite Possible Pythons for sponsoring this week's episode. If you guys have any branding needs, tablecloths for your reptile shows, the banners for behind your booth, anything like that, shirts, business cards, Nathan is a one-stop shop for all your business, branding needs. And on top of it, he's working some killer ball python projects, and he's getting into, I think they're called, you said Chihuahua geckos? I think that's how you pronounce it, right, Brian?
Yeah.
Okay. I always want to call them Chihuahua geckos, so it screws with me.
Yeah, it
But
goes back and forth. Most people call them Chihuahuas, but I've heard technically it's pronounced with a hard C, like a K, so it should be Kahua, but nobody says it that way. Like people call them Chewies, is their nickname, is a Chewy for Chihuahua, but technically it should be a hard K, but that's splitting hairs.
All right, well, we'll run with it then. We'll just keep it with how I butchered it with the Chihuahua part. But everybody, check Nathan out. All of his information is in the description down below. And I also want to thank my buddy Chris at S Reptilia. Basically, Chris is a one-stop shop, folks, for if you ball pythons, blood pythons, he's working different boas, colubrids. He's got you covered. Definitely hit him up if you are in the PA area and you need rodents. He breeds rats, and on top of it, he is Pennsylvania's distributor of Coco to Go and the Chipper. So definitely make sure you check him out if you need either of those. Everybody, just so you know, Coco to Go is probably by far the best substrate out there on the market when you're talking coconut chip bedding. So definitely hit Chris up if you are interested in any of that. Like I said, links are in the description, everybody. And also, not sure if anybody, because I don't know what you use for record keeping, Brian, but for anybody that's doing Crested Geckos and you might not be thinking of this, the link should be in the description down below, but also here's the link as well. It's for a free 30-day trial of Husbandry Pro. It is, in my opinion, the best reptile record keeping and tracking software on the market today. You can make it work for anything: snakes, lizards, there's somebody that even uses it to keep track of oil changes. So you can literally manipulate this to track just about anything you want. And the great thing is with this software is that the people that are using it are what's shaping its future, because the Billy from Mutation Creation and Robert of Husbandry Pro, they work hand in hand on this, and they take what the users are saying, they take their feedback and help push the software that much farther into production. And it's absolutely great. Definitely check it out. It's free 30 days, folks. If you don't like it, you don't have to subscribe then. But use that link, and it just lets them know, hey, Jeremy sent you. So that's my spiel, everybody. Thank you for hearing it. Let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anything here in the chat. Tammy says, my female Cresty is producing eggs almost every month. Good to know about dropping the temperatures. When it's hot, my home is kept at 77. When it's cold, it's 75. Okay. Now, what do you, as far as incubating, Brian, the eggs, how do you go about doing all that?
So I actually use, you can see it, the corner of it's right here. I use a wine cooler for an incubator. Okay. I incubate them right about 70 degrees is ideal, and they'll incubate for 100 to 110 days.
For how long? 110 days.
Mm-hmm. If you incubate them warmer, you can have. I've heard of people incubating them so warm they'll get them to hatch in 40 to 45 days. But if the cooler you incubate them, you can't go too cold, obviously. But in the low 70s, they incubate longer. Their colors are a little better, and their structure's better. They're just physically they're better formed. They're bigger when they hatch. They're healthier. So trying to keep them in that like 70 to 72 range is ideal.
Okay. That kind of makes sense, because if you're not rushing the development, obviously everything's got a lot more time to form properly.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, are they like, do temperatures determine the sex of them, or is it kind of a gamble with every clutch?
Yeah, so these ones, they're not temp sexed. It's a gamble with every clutch. I've tried splitting groups up and incubating some at 76 to 77 and some at 68 to 70 to see if there's any sex different in the temps. There doesn't seem to be. If there is, it's the best I've gotten is like a 55% skew towards female, which to me isn't enough that it's not just anecdotal. I could have just got lucky at that point. Like, it doesn't seem to be that it makes any real difference.
Okay. See, that's another thing I find interesting, though, because there's some geckos where they're temperature based, and obviously here's one where it doesn't really matter much. That's really
it's strange. Even Leachianus geckos from the same island, somewhat closely related, are temp sexed, but Cresties aren't. Just like Leachies will regrow their tails and Cresties won't. They're strange little creatures.
I'm not gonna lie, and I might get some hate on this. Leachies freak me out. There's something about them, like they kind of all right, I'm not much of a dog person either, so forgive me on this, everybody, but are they bulldogs or whatever that have like all the rolls to them or whatever? That's kind of what Leachies remind me of, because everyone I've seen, they look like they're just big fat rolly lizards. Like, I don't know. Maybe everyone I've
seen when they get mad too.
But they're just really weird looking. The Cresties, however, I love the spiky look. They look kind of like dragons almost to me.
Yeah. Cresties are friendly too. Leachies can get pretty nasty. They get mean sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. They get mean. When they get mad and they scream, they do this like demon scream that sounds like if you heard it in the woods at night, you'd be running for the car. When they get mad and they start screaming at you, it's freaky. And they're big geckos. They can take a pretty good bite too.
I was gonna say, I bet they would take a nice chunk out of you, because I know Tokays aren't very. A Tokay bite kind of sucks.
Yeah, so they're pretty similar. Tokays are a bit more temperamental. Leachies get really territorial. So a lot of the times when you're trying to get them out of their cage, they don't like it. They'll be biting, lunging at you. But normally, as soon as you get them out, they're fine. I only have a handful of Leachies, but I've got a couple that you can't reach in their cage. They're trying to bite your fingers off. But if you can get a hold of them and get them out, they're giant puppy dogs. Once they're out, they don't care.
That's so weird. I was just gonna. Hold on, let me get my thought here. I had it and I lost it. Oh, the one thing because I was helping my buddy Danny there at DTMG show here recently, and that was like my first experience actually like with Crested Geckos was that show. It boggled my mind that they were pulling out these Cresties out of the little deli cups, and that they were just slow moving. They like very gentle, but the big thing was like they were just slow moving, and I expected them to be once you got them out of that container, gone. Like they just looked like they got a wild spell to them, but they were just slow and mellow, and it's just like wow.
Most of the time they are. You can get ones where they go crazy and they'll take off running and they're kind of wild. But again, for the most part, the most of them that live in that middle area, they're very easy to handle. It's another reason they make such great pets and they've gotten so popular. Yeah, Living Wild. I've got a couple leechies from them. I've got one more on the way from them. They do great work with leechies too. Yeah, okay. The Cresties, it's one of the reasons they're popular. I always tell people, like, if you want, like, reptiles should be treated like fish tanks. Like, they're just living decorations. Like, people get pet reptiles and want to treat it like a dog, and that's not good for the animals. Crested geckos, I always tell people they don't like being handled, but they tolerate it as well as any reptile you're going to find. So if you want an interactive pet reptile, they're a very good option. They're easy to keep. They're easy to handle. They get accustomed to you pretty quickly and don't jump around and they don't bite. Like I said, they don't like being handled, but they tolerate it better than just about anything else.
I was going to say, yeah, from my experience, I mean, like I said, I don't know much about the Cresties, but I had leopard geckos before, and my son had leopard geckos, and they were a pain in the neck to handle sometimes. Sometimes they just want to go. The Cresties definitely had a huge upside with the fact that they were a lot more slow moving and easy going.
Yeah, and one thing that nobody ever talks about, but in my experience, I've had a few pet leopard geckos. I've never bred them. But to me, I've always been nervous, like giving kids a leopard gecko because they want to hold it and they're standing up. And leopard geckos, they're kind of hard to hold. Like when they walk off your hand, they're just going to flop to the ground and get hurt. Whereas Cresties, for one, they're indestructible. Like they're built in the wild, when they come across danger, their safety tactic is just launch myself out of the tree. And then wherever I land, at least I'm not getting eaten by a bird. Like they're kind of bulletproof. And leopard geckos don't have sticky pads and they don't have very big claws. So when they fall off something, they can't do anything about it. Crested geckos have sticky toes, bigger claws, and their tail they can use as an appendage to grab onto things. It's like I just feel a lot better giving a crested gecko to people to hold because it's a lot harder to drop, which I think is something nobody ever really talks about. But I worry about leopard geckos. I don't like giving a leopard gecko to a 5-year-old kid. It's going to get hurt.
Now, how, like, when you're at shows, how, like, do you normally let kids handle like, do you have, like, one gecko that's designated, hey, if somebody wants to hold one, this is that gecko, or are you a little bit leery on that, or how does that go since you brought up that?
I let most of them be handled. Honestly, it sounds crass because I don't like, obviously I do this for a living and the price of the animal is my entire life, but I still feel weird when you start putting prices on animals. Like I don't let people handle the expensive ones, even though it's the same, like it's no more dangerous to handle it than a cheap one. But I'm like, yeah, kid, you want to hold one? Let's hold this one over here because this one's 4 or 5 times the price. So other than that, and the other thing, if there's a million people at the booth and it's super crazy, I'll tell them like, just can you come back when it's not crazy? Because I don't want to start losing animals, or if it does jump on the ground and somebody steps on it or something. But for the most part, yeah, they're so easy to handle. Like you saw at the show, I'll just, you want to pull one out of the cup and play with it, let the kids look at it. I mean, to me, that's half the point is, all of this, none of this happens. I don't have a business. I don't have a career. You don't have a podcast if people don't like reptiles. So why wouldn't I do whatever small part I can if I make this 5-year-old kid love a gecko? Like that's why I'm into it. It's because I held one of these at a pet store and the guy knew full well I wasn't going to buy it and he still let me hold it. If that didn't happen, I wouldn't be here today. So why would I not let this kid do the same thing? Like, you got to let people see them.
See, that's like a lot of people, and I'll speak from the snake side of things. There are some people that like me, I mean, if someone has to hold a snake, especially kids, it's just like, here, let me get one out that, it isn't massively super expensive in case you do drop it or something. Not that, like you said, not that the cheaper ones are any less, less valuable or important, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
It's a weird dynamic, right? Where it's like they are valuable, but they're not, like their life isn't less valuable, but their price is, and it's a hard thing to reconcile. It is.
Exactly. But it's, kids are the future, and I enjoy putting a ball python in some kids' hands and watching their eyes light up. Yeah. Sometimes it's the first snake that they were ever allowed to hold because 10 other breeders wouldn't let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I get why some people do it. They're afraid of, maybe that person has mites on them from another table that they were at. I do get that.
Yeah.
But at the same token, I mean, you're at the show. If you're going to get it, you're going to get it. So, give those kids that opportunity because they are the future. I look at it this way. If I let a kid, or like for you even, you let a kid hold a crested gecko, nobody else left them hold a cresty or a lizard or anything. That kid's going to remember that, and him and his parents will seek you out for their business.
Yeah.
There's more than one positive end to that whole ordeal.
Yeah, the whole industry needs support. Like you said, if kids don't, I've been doing this for almost 15 years. I'd like to do this for 15 more. I'm not going to be selling to the same people 15 years from now that I am now. I'm going to be selling to the kids that are holding geckos at a show right now.
Yep, exactly. Nathan, what's up, dude? Thank you very much for tuning in. Lindsay says we have one crested with very smart, flawless naturally. Our other crested has mediocre person.
Little to no smarts. So she's talking about flawless. She's referring to flawless crested geckos. If you want to do another crested gecko episode, those are two of my best friends in the world, Will and Audra. They're a couple that run the business together. Some of the best the best humans in the business, some of the best geckos in the business. I highly recommend you want to talk to some good gecko people. Give them a call. They're great, great people with great animals.
I'll make a note of that. Is it just flawless or?
Yeah, flawless crested geckos. They're some of my favorite people. They flew out when I did the Vegas show last year. They flew out just to help me vend that show. We've done a few vacations together. They live on the other side of the country, unfortunately, but we make it work. We try and get together when we can.
Where are they located at?
They're in South Carolina. I always forget which Carolina they're in. South Carolina.
Okay. So they're East Coast. So I mean, not too far from me. I'm in Pennsylvania, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you've run into them at a show at some point.
Let's see here. Living Wild says allowing people to hold the animal changes the game. A lot of people are skeptical before holding an animal. Once they hold one, it's game over. That is very true, too. Yep. That is very true.
Can't tell you how many times I've had people think that gecko's going to be there for some reason, the old trope, it's slimy. It's a reptile. It's slimy. Or they think it's real hard and pokey because they have all the crests, and really cresties feel like velvet or suede. And they're blown away when they hold it, how soft they are. I don't even think Danny let me hold a crested gecko. Danny, I feel deprived now, dude. You gypped me, bro. Laney here says, we're huge fans of Brian's here at Trinity Geckos and have multiple geckos he's produced. I will say anyone who doesn't have one is missing out. I went from 1 to 70 in a few years. They're addicting. I can believe that. I know ball pythons and snakes in general are very addicting. This whole hobby is addicting. It is, yeah.
Danny says, can crested geckos get mites?
The only issue with mites I've ever had was I got a group of geckos from a really old school, like one of the original breeders who had brought geckos in from the wild. Like you can't import wild cresties anymore. You haven't been able to since like 96, I think, is when they shut down exports.
Okay, did that kind of happen when Australia did their thing too?
Yeah, so cresties were actually, they thought they were extinct. They'd been described in the late 1800s, and then it was assumed they had gone extinct until the early 90s when they were rediscovered. And they had only ever, the official number was about 200, 250 were taken off the island. It was probably double or triple that with, it's never what the official number is.
Yeah.
But then it was either 96 or 98. They shut off exports from the island, so you can't get anything out now. So everything we have is part of that original group that came out in the early 90s.
Okay.
So the only mites I've ever had where I got geckos from one of the old school breeders, he was one of the ones that brought in the original ones on export, and he still had the wild mites from his wild caught animals in like 2012, 2013. And I got geckos from him that had mites. But that's the only time, and those were like I said, they were native mites that for some reason he hadn't gotten rid of in 20 years. We're still in his collection. It was sketchy. That's the only time I've ever had an issue with it. Other than that, I've never had problems.
Okay, all right, awesome. See, that's another thing. I would have thought, I know obviously snake mites. I would have thought,
Yeah, we don't really have issues. The only mites I ever see are, have you ever seen the videos where like people will like soak a strawberry and little mites will crawl out like a strawberry from the store, and it's supposed to freak you out that like all of our food and everything has mites on it. They call them grain mites. Once in a while we'll see those if they get into the gecko's food, but they don't bother the geckos. Like they don't congregate on the geckos like they do with snakes. They don't affect the geckos, and then you just clean all the tubs and get the grain mites that they probably came in with a loaf of bread or some fruit that I bought or something, or they came in on a batch of crickets. But they don't bother the geckos. They just go after the gecko's food, and then you clean all the food dishes and scrub some cages, and they don't bother the geckos at all. It's, again, one of the nice things about them. They're pretty bulletproof.
I was gonna say that's really neat, dude. Eric at Drop Time. Eric, what's up, dude? Thanks for tuning in. He wants to know what are Halloween? Is it just a color mutation or is it a gene?
Yeah, so Halloween is just a description when you get geckos that their base color is really black and their markings are really orange. It's not it's not a specific gene. It's just a descriptor when you have a gecko that looks like Halloween colors, basically.
Okay. See, there we go, Brian, with Danny. There, it's a you never know what you're gonna get with Danny. Eric, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was actually my next topic. Is how do the genetics work with cresties? Are they actual genetic combos? Is it more of a line breeding thing? I was watching some of your videos and you were talking about base colors. Like, is there something that determines base colors? Like, explain all this to me, because it had my head spinning watching the videos.
Yeah, your head's still going to be spinning when I'm done, because all of our heads are spinning a bit. Cresties are a bit unique. So there are genetic mutations, just like every other reptile. There's morphs. There are line bred traits. There are morphs that are line bred to make the expression of them bigger. But like Dalmatian spots are a genetic trait, but then we line bred Dalmatian spots for bigger spots, more spots.
Okay.
So, it's like having a Dalmatian is a gene, but then how expressive that gene is, you can manipulate through line breeding. And then the other problem with cresties, there's no one wild type. So another breeder, when I was first getting into it, explained it to me this way that really helped me understand it. He said the problem with cresties, everybody for a long time said they're just polygenic. There's no real mutations. It's just a crapshoot, which isn't the truth. They're all real mutations. They're all real genetics. We just don't have one wild type. Like if I gave you a corn snake that had 5 different genes in it, but you didn't know what they were, you could, in theory, breed that back to a normal wild type over and over and reverse engineer it, isolate each gene, and tell me exactly what it was. There is no wild type Cresty. There's no one wild type. So we can't do that. So we got 200 wild geckos originally, and none of them were just one straight wild type. And then they were all just interbred and selectively bred, and all the genes were messed up. And it wasn't until 20 years later that we started going, well, let's try and figure out the genetics behind all these things. So there's a bunch of things where it's like, we don't know if it's like one gene that's doing this or 2 or 3 genes that interact to do this, or if it's like 2 genes, but one of them's been line bred in a way to make it look a certain way. There's a lot of uncertainty behind it. It's way better than it was 10, 15 years ago. We know a ton more than we used to. There's a lot of people that are actually dedicated to working on figuring all this out, whereas 10 years ago, it was just, oh, just pair them together and you'll never know what you'll get. So another one of the reasons they've blown up in popularity in the last 5 years is now we have answers to a lot of those questions. And we do know what traits are recessive and what traits are incomplete dominant and all these. Like, we're figuring a lot of it out. There's still a lot that we don't know, but it's a lot more clear than it used to be.
Okay. Now, so the base colors then, is that just like a random thing then? Or is that kind of going back to the fact of you had so many different things and it's now you're trying to kind of figure out what makes those base colors pop through?
Yes, a little. We've figured out quite a bit with the base colors. So a lot of them, like the Harlequin geckos, the base color's one, and then there's a pattern over the top, and then you can manipulate what color the base is. It can be either black, brown, orange, red. And we've figured out like the red base color is genetic, the orange is genetic. You can breed specifically for those. And then we've also identified there's several enhancer genes. There's a form of hypo. A lot of people call it was originally called the C2 gene. It stood for cream on cream because the first ones that were really identified were like whitish yellow cream colored geckos. But down the road, we figured out it's actually an enhancer hypotype gene that when you add that into a dark base color gecko, it cleans out all the dark, dirty pigment and you get really clean black geckos. If you add that gene into a red gecko, it cleans out all the dark brownish pigment and you get bright neon red geckos. So we've kind of figured out you can manipulate the base color pretty consistently, and then you can add other things in to make it brighter or darker.
This is making me just want to play mad scientist with them. I'm not gonna lie.
That's so much fun because it's part like ball pythons are so mathematical, and you can with a pencil and paper figure out exactly what you should get in theory. It's part that, and it's part let's just play God and put things together and see what happens, and then see if we can figure out why did that happen. And it's kind of fun because you get the best of both worlds.
That's really neat. Nathan, I'm going to get to your question that you popped up there, but since we're kind of on the genetics thing, I want to hit Eric's here first quick. Eric asked, do you find that the fork at the base of the tail is a marker for cappuccino?
Yes, mostly that's what I'm told. I have not a ton of experience with cappuccinos. So for you and for everybody else that doesn't know, cappuccinos are relatively new morph. It doesn't look all that different from a normal gecko. Like there's a few markers that you can look at. There's a fork, like a base at the base of the tail, like a forked Y formation that comes up on a lot of them. Okay. And the super form of cappuccino is, they call it a super cappuccino. Originally it was called melanistic, but that's not really accurate. They're translucent is what they are. They should have been called translucent from the start. Now we just call them super cappuccinos. I haven't bred. I have a bunch of them. I'm just now breeding them this season for the first time. So I don't have a ton of hands-on experience hatching babies and identifying what's a cappuccino and what's not. So most of my answer is what I've read and researched from other people at this point. But yes, it does seem that's one. There's a lot of markers for cappuccino that are like, they're not foolproof, but they give you a very good idea if it's a cappuccino or not. That's definitely one of them that a lot of people talk about as a good thing to look at to get an idea.
Then he had also asked, does any other genes give that marking?
Not consistently that I know of. Like I said, it's one of those weird things that you can get that marking on a gecko that's not a cappuccino, but I don't know of any other genes that consistently give that marking like cappuccino does.
Okay. And my buddy Nathan here, which is one of the sponsors of tonight's episode, folks. Please go give him some love. Check out all of his information in the description down below. But what is your crested feeding regimen? Which I think is also a really neat, a good topic there. I didn't think of that one, Nathan, so thank you.
So I have a whole YouTube video on it that gets way into more detail about it if people want to look that up. But essentially, I feed Crested Gecko diet. It's like a powder that you mix with water. It's a fruit paste slurry, basically. They eat that. There's a couple different companies that make good versions of that. Repashy, Pangea, and Black Panther Zoological are 3 that I use. And I feed that twice a week and crickets once a week normally.
Okay. All right. Now, this is one thing that kind of has always, it boggled my mind with them. In the wild, because obviously there's nobody out there making a little smoothie for these lizards out in the wild. So what are they actually eating out in the wild that makes them think it's okay to eat this little smoothie that the humans make for them?
So it's a bit controversial, but the reality is the smoothies were made as a marketing thing. So back in the day, a bunch of these animals got imported in. And a guy named Alan Repashy, he was the first one to make a prepared diet like this.
Okay.
And he had a whole genius business plan where he realized these animals are very easy to reproduce, and I can reproduce them in mass numbers. They're also very easy to keep, and they would make great pets. The only problem is how to feed them on large scale and make them. His thought was, how can I make these more appealing to the mass public so I can sell them to Petco and PetSmart in huge numbers? His solution was to make this prepared freeze-dried diet that you mix with water, and it's like a fruit paste. And that was his whole sales pitch, was these animals don't even need crickets. If you have a mom their kid wants a snake, but I don't want to feed it rodents, or I don't like leopard geckos because I don't want bugs in my house, get a crested gecko because they don't need crickets. That's not entirely true. They need bugs. They can survive on just the powdered diet. It's not ideal for them, but a lot of it was marketing. In reality, it is a healthy food. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trashing the food. It's very healthy food. I feed it to mine every day. They have that food in their cages. Just the idea that they don't need anything else was more marketing than reality. In the wild, their diet varies greatly by season. They've done studies where certain seasons they go out and they'll study the stomach contents of geckos, and there are 95+% insects. But during the fruiting season, there's a lot of fig trees where they come from. They eat a lot of rotting fig, any fruit they can get their hands on, pollen, nectar. Basically, they're opportunists. They'll eat anything they can, and their diet varies greatly by season. I've always wondered if I replicated that with my animals and gave them a higher fruit-based diet during one part of the year and a more insect-based diet the other part, and tried to mimic that natural curve, if that would improve their health, improve breeding results at all, versus just giving them the same thing all year long. I don't know enough about their natural variation to be able to replicate that in a way that I think would be beneficial. And it's also risky. If it's not beneficial, then I'm screwing up a lot of geckos by trying something that might not work. So I'm not really willing to do it, but I have wondered maybe that would be a better way to go.
See, I appreciate you answering that, because that was one thing that, like you said, it was a big selling point for a lot of people, because I will admit, when my son would go to his mom's house, I was stuck taking care of the leopard gecko, and it's like having to remember to go up and feed crickets to something every day when I had everything else going on here with the snakes and everything. Like, it was a pain in the neck, I'm not gonna lie. So it was like hearing that, hey, these lizards actually will just eat this little smoothie you make for them. It's like, that's amazing. But then it made me wonder, it's like, well, if they're eating this in captivity, what the hell do they actually eat in the wild?
Yeah, so I tell people in the wild, they'll eat anything they can get their hands on. Mostly fruit, pollen, nectar, and whatever insect they can catch.
KMS says, interesting thoughts on feeding regimen.
I've always thought, if I had more time and I wasn't just constantly on the edge of as busy as I can possibly handle, I think it would be interesting to take a group of like 100 babies and isolate them in one certain part of my facility and try that kind of a feeding regimen where I say, okay, from, do some research on the island they come from and when is the fruit ripe, when is the fruit falling, when are the flowers coming out, and try and, do like 3 different parts of the year where I alter their feeding schedule and raise them for 2 or 3 years and just see how do they look? Do they get a little bigger? Do they look healthier? Do they grow faster? Do they grow slower? Just see if it does anything. But
that would be interesting.
It would be interesting. It's a lot of work, a lot of tracking, a lot of I'm busy. I like the way my life is. I'm constantly I work myself to death, and when I'm not working, I'm traveling like mad. It's like just not realistic for me right now. But it's one of those million ideas I have in the back of my head. I'm like, someday I might try that just to see. Maybe you could rewrite the book a little bit.
Hey, there you go. My brother Danny wants to know, are empty back recessive? Is empty back a recessive gene?
So this is a weird one, right? This is one that is controversial when I answer it, which is ridiculous because it shouldn't be, because I'm the guy that made the name empty back and people still fighting on it. So there was a morph, a guy about 10 years ago identified a type of pinstripe that had a real distinct line down the middle of the back, and he called them super stripes, like a super form. It's not a super form, but like they look like cleaner, nicer versions of pinstripes.
Okay.
So I bought a group of those from him, and my goal was to take super stripes and selectively breed them to make that stripe in the back wider and wider, hence empty backs. I was like, how empty can I get the dorsal line to look? And it was just my project name for I'm going to selectively breed super stripes and spread that stripe out. And now that name has gotten so popular because I admittedly, in my part, I didn't properly make it well known enough that that's what I was doing. I just referred to it as my empty back line, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own and is now referred to as its own separate genetic mutation, when in reality it's not. All of my, like anything that people call an empty back generally comes from my line, and every single one of those is a super stripe. It's not a different mutation. It's not its own gene. They're just super stripes that I selectively bred to get the widest back possible. And now I get people that will fight me on it, be like, no, you're wrong. Empty backs are their own recessive gene. And I'm like, they're literally my animals. Like, I bought every one of the founding parents from AC Reptiles who identified the super stripe gene. They're all super stripes. I've had conversations with other people and maybe I hit on something else and that's why mine look different and it is a separate gene. I think my working theory right now is that my super stripes, I worked in that C2 hypo gene too, that kind of enhancer gene. And I think that I've noticed with a lot of other animals, that gene, it cleans out dark pigment and it kind of limits pattern production. So I think adding that hypo, that enhancer gene into a super stripe is why I've gotten the pattern down the back to disappear as much as it has, and it makes it crisper and they look different than super stripes. That's my working theory right now, is they're actually just hypo super stripes. It's not a different gene. It's actually a combination. They're just like super stripe combos, basically.
Okay, awesome. See, there again, that goes back to earlier. It's the line breeding thing. It
is. That's why people fight me. It's a different morph. I'm like, no, dude, it's my morph. I'm literally telling you, it's just line bred super stripes.
Lindsay says, other than Lily White, what would be your favorite gene to pair to your Axanthic? It's for her 11-year-old.
So my other big Axanthic project right now is Super Dalmatians. I really want Axanthic Super Dalmatians. I've been working on that one for a couple years. It's kind of slow going. I'm now getting to the point I have a couple nice Dalmatian Axanthics, and I've got a lot of Super Dalmatian Het Axanthics that are growing up from the last couple years. So that's other than Lily White Axanthics, that's my main focus with the Axanthic lines, is I really want, especially like really light colored Axanthics, because they can range anywhere from almost white to jet black, depending on how much pigment they have. They're really, really light ones that are almost white. If I get one of those with a bunch of big black Dalmatian spots on it, that'd be a freaking cool animal.
That would be neat. Now, See, at first when Lindsay asked this, I thought she was going towards a sweet place in my heart, and I love exantic ball pythons. Like my motto is exantic everything. So obviously, I had to do some looking at some exantic crested geckos, before doing this live with you. And I gotta say, there for a while, some of the examples I was seeing. I even told my buddy Danny, he's like, dude, what I'm seeing doesn't look exantic to me.
Mm-hmm.
But then I saw your stuff, and it's like, okay, that there is what exantic should look like.
So,
like, it's just.
I'm gonna go on a rant about that. A quick rant about that. I have a huge problem with a lot of people who have exanthic geckos now, because a huge part of why they don't look very nice is just people's photography skills. Because everybody just takes a picture with their smartphone, and the pictures generally, especially under the LED lights that we all have now, they look really yellow. And everybody is terrified to edit their pictures because, God forbid, you get called out for editing a picture of an animal on Instagram and the whole world burns down. I'm actually doing in May, I'm going to a boutique reptile show in New York called the Flora and Fauna Expo. It's very gecko focused. It's a general reptile show, but it's mostly gecko people show up. And it's not like a general big giant reptile show. It's very small, very intimate. Like it's meant to, so you can have real in-depth conversations with the breeders. At that show, I'm actually doing a photography seminar. And that's one of my main points I'm going to focus on, is how to edit your reptile photos to make them look good, but not to change what your reptiles look like. And the main point of that is the only thing I really edit to a significant degree on my photos is the white balance. Because if you take a picture of an exanthic and the white balance is off, it's going to look really brown or yellow. And then people post those on Instagram and everybody goes, oh, exanthic crested geckos are ugly. And I go, no, they look great. The white balance just sucks in that picture. Like, just edit your white balance a little bit until the gecko in your hand looks like the gecko on your phone, and then post the photo. That's my rant about it. So I'm hoping to help kind of educate on that a little bit, because like I said, some of the pictures are just bad pictures. They look really brown.
Are you by chance going to be recording that? Because I'm going to be, I'll just flat out say this, because I hate taking pictures of my exanthic ball pythons, because like you just said, no matter what light I get it in, or even with my ring light, playing around with the settings on that, even just some of the filters I can do, I can't get the snake to look right. It's like, I tell everybody, it's like these things are like very black, white, and silvery gray. It's like there's like no brown in them. But no matter what settings I do, it just comes out looking like almost like a normal ball python. It's like, no.
So if you're, I'm gonna in my presentation, I'm gonna show two ways. Like in camera, if you're using a proper SLR camera or a DSLR camera, generally those photos I don't have to edit, because you can change the white balance in the camera, and I'll just set it to where the pictures turn out basically good to go right off the bat. Phones are much harder if you're using your phone. It does all the settings for you. And when I do those, then I bring it into a program and just move the white balance slider down to where I need it to be. So I'm gonna kind of go through both of that in the presentation and really show, like, depending on what you're using to take your photos, it doesn't matter what you use, whatever camera you have, you can make these animals look better without, like, there's some people that'll just crank the contrast and the saturation, and the geckos don't even look natural anymore. So you don't have to do that, but you can just tweak it a little bit so the gecko on the picture looks like the gecko you're holding in your hand.
See, that I think is very important, because there are those, I mean, at least for the ball python world, there's a lot of snakes where it's like, if you don't play with settings, what the picture you took does not look like the snake in your hand. So I can only imagine with some of those colors I see on the geckos, it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and people don't consider, like, if I take a photo in this room versus in the room right out there, they're two completely different animals, because in that room I have grow lights everywhere, because I have a bunch of pothos plants growing all over the place, and those all look pink because the grow lights have a pink tinge. This one's a yellow LED light, and the ones in my other room are white LED lights. It's like, I could take 3 photos in 3 different rooms down here, and I get 3 different looking animals. But then if you know how to adjust the photo right, you can make all 3 of those photos look exactly the same.
Awesome. I would really look forward to. I hope
I'll have to shoot an email to Gabby and the runners of that show and be like, can we like live stream it? Would be great, or even if I can just set up a good camera and record it and post it.
Dude, yeah, I think
social later so I can share it. I think that'd be a good idea.
I think it would be, in all honesty. Like, and maybe that's just me being selfish, but I personally would have really appreciate that. My was asked, how do you produce red empty backs? Would you pair black empty back with red quad?
Yeah, exactly. Pairing a black, just a regular empty back, a regular super stripe with either a red pinstripe, red quad stripe would be ideal, or a red phantom pinstripe would work as well.
All right, and then Ball Labs wants to know, says, Brian, what are your thoughts on the Sable? Is it a new gene complex or the result of two codoms?
I don't know. So I have never seen a Sable in person. They look, and from everything I know, they look somewhat similar and breeding wise operate similar to the cappuccinos and super cappuccinos. The super form looks very, very similar. The Sables and cappuccinos, there's different visual markers for them, but they're very similar. I don't think they're the same gene. There's a party of people out there that think they're the same gene, and somebody's just marketing their cappuccinos as Sables to try and get better prices for them. I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
I don't have great answers because I've never worked with Sables. They're fairly new, like within the last couple years new. And I've never worked with them. I've never actually seen one in person. Even most of them are in South Korea at this point. There's a few in the States, but the majority of them are still in Korea.
Oh wow, okay. So it's kind of like the ball python market then, where there's some stuff that's across the pond that hasn't quite come across yet.
Yep.
Cool. Danny here asks that he says he bought a pair of charcoals from you last Black Friday. Is charcoal a different variation of phantom?
So, no. Phantom is a gene that, so I was talking earlier about the base color and then the pattern color on top of that. Like you get a red base color with pattern on top. The phantom gene mutes out that pattern. So you can still see, like, it's almost like you erase the color. You can see where the pattern would be, but the color's gone, like the cream or white color's all gone. Charcoals are all patternless, but I don't think they're all phantoms. I got those. I bought a big pack of wholesale geckos once, like 12, 13 years ago, and there was one gecko in it that grew up and it was patternless. It looked like a phantom, but it was really, really dark. I thought it was weird because it was like super melanistic, and that's the entire charcoal line comes from that one gecko. I just ID'd that one and bred it out, and it ended up being they're melanistic. I do think there's a super form. For a long time, I thought they were just charcoals and it was just line breeding, that there were some were darker than others. But now that we're actually looking out for stuff like that more than we were 10 years ago, I do think there's a super form to the charcoals. You can see it when they're younger. Some charcoals start off kind of grayish colored and they get darker as they grow up. And the super charcoals are really dark even when they're younger. Like they stand out a lot. They work like phantoms where they don't have any pattern. They're just all base color. They're all black, but they don't. I don't think they're the same thing as phantom. I think it's a case of the same visual appearance but different genes.
Okay, gotcha. There you go, Danny. Hope that helped you, brother. Drippy says Sable started in the U.S. Korean breeder. I'm gonna really butcher that trying to say it. Moomosaurus. That's really, I don't think that it sounds like a dinosaur. I'm sorry, but did the work. So.
Yeah, Sable. So Sable, I think originally first popped up in Gecko Haven's collection, if I remember right, Cindy's collection, and she sold a couple before they really ID'd what they were. Sold them to some guys in Korea, and they have huge breeding operations over there, so they've been able to blow it up and really work with it in a way that we haven't in the States yet. They had the first ones, and by the time they ID'd it that it had a super form and what it really was, they were already producing them in much larger numbers. That's why most of them are over in Korea. There are some in the States, but they're way, way more common over there.
Okay, awesome. All right, everybody, if you guys have any questions, just keep dropping them in the chat. I greatly appreciate everybody's participation in the chat and all the support. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. I appreciate it. What morphs right now, in your opinion, are some of the hottest on the market for the Cresties?
So the sables and super sables are really hot. The cappuccinos and super cappuccinos, those were really, really hot for a while, and they ran into some issues that there's health issues with the super cappuccinos that have been identified.
Okay.
They seem to have calcium absorption issues, so they can get low calcium problems easier than other geckos can, and they also get an issue where their nostrils are a lot smaller, and sometimes they even have a very thin layer of skin that completely covers the nostrils. So I've heard people say they have breathing issues. I've never had breathing issues with any of mine, but they do have smaller nostrils, and they aren't as big bodied. They're smaller animals. They don't get as robust as a lot of other animals do. So there's clearly some health issues with those. How much of that is related directly to the genetics versus being just mass produced in huge numbers from a small beginning crop of animals might be part of it. So, some of those issues might go away as we begin to cross them out into different lines and bolster those genetics a little bit. A lot of it remains to be seen. The other problem with the cappuccinos is when they came out, they were pitched as a brand new super exclusive morph. And then we found out about a year later that they'd been being produced in enormous numbers, like without any, like there was a breeder in the US, they were like Korean exclusive, and one big breeder over there was selling them in handfuls. And then we found out, well, that guy was breeding them by the thousands. And there was a wholesale breeder here in the States that had them for years already that was hatching them out by the thousands. And they're not actually that rare. They're all over the freaking place. And the price just went through the floor because they're actually way more common than we originally thought. And that seems like screwed up the sable market now, because I don't think cappuccino and sable are the same thing. But again, they look very similar, even though they're separate genes. And it's kind of like, well, why would I spend 5 times as much on a sable that's very rare when I can get the same visual appearance with a cappuccino for way less money? So that's screwing up the sable market. The whole thing's kind of a mess. But they're very exciting. They're new genes. It's really cool to work with them. I'm excited to start breeding them this year.
See, that's one thing, like with the ball python market too, like there's so many other genes that look similar to others. And sometimes it can tank one or the other. So, it also depends on who's back. Ooh, didn't mean to whack my table here. It also kind of depends what big names kind of working with certain genes, as far as which gene kind of takes the spotlight and all that stuff.
Yeah, there can be politics that play into it that way too.
Yeah. What I hear a lot of talk like about lily whites. Where do the lily whites fall into on that hot commodity?
So they started off really, really hot. I think they were actually vastly underpriced when they first came out. I don't think the original breeder really had a good idea of how the demand for those would look. And they held their price because they started so underpriced. They held their price for a long time. And then they started to fall. And then when Axanthic and all these other combos with lily whites came out, that kind of boosted the price. That gave, kind of kept it afloat a little bit, because lily white Axanthics are super, super popular, and it's really hard to get an Axanthic, but you also need a lily white to do that. So that kind of gave them an extra boost. Now they're coming down to the point where for years it was like anything that was lily white was worth 4 figures no matter what. Okay. And now they're pretty common. So it's getting to the point where it should be, honestly, that like quality matters. How nice of the lily white? What's the base color? How clean is it? How much lily white pattern does it have? Does it match exactly what you want for your project? We're not in the days of just any lily white's worth a ton of money anymore. Now it's the right lily white is still very, very desirable.
It's the quality over the quantity aspect now.
Yeah. Now it's, like I said, not just every lily white's worth a lot. People want the right lily white.
Drippy says they are still hot and people think lily isn't going any further, but just wait.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's a lot of people. So the super form of lily white is leucistic, but it's fatal. They generally don't even make it out of the egg. If they do,
Oh,
they've never lived more than a day at most. They're
okay.
not healthy. So you can't breed two lily whites together. Because of that, a lot of people think it's a dead end gene, like, oh, they're really cool, but now that they're all over the place, there's nowhere else to go. I think that's really short-sighted. There's a lot you can do with them. There's lily white sables, lily white cappuccinos are called frappuccinos, lily white super sables, lily white axanthics. There's base color like red and orange lily whites aren't very popular. There's a lot of refinement you can do within that to get nicer and nicer animals. There's a ton of work to do.
And to me, from the outside looking in, it seems like the crested gecko market in itself, there's so much to be done line breeding wise with it that none of the genes, I can't see any of the genes really like falling by the wayside. It's, if you just hammer out, put the work in, and like you were like with your empty back, just kind of refine that gene and keep working with it and take the best of the best, it's going to stay around.
Yeah, and it also helps that things come and go in fads. Like 15 years ago when I got into this, Dalmatians were super popular and everybody wanted nice super Dalmatians. And then a few years later, nobody liked Dalmatians anymore. And their price tanked and nobody liked them. And a lot of people quit working with them. And I liked them, so I kept working with them and kept making nicer and nicer ones. And now Dalmatians, really nice Dalmatians, are back in style and the price went way up and everybody wants the nicest super Dalmatians again. It's the same thing. Like, there's stuff that people just aren't really paying attention to because they're not real popular right now, that there's a lot of room to work with. And someday that's going to be the new fad one and everybody will work with it.
Yep. No, I totally get that. Danny says, do you think Exantic will hold their price or price correction coming?
There's definitely a price correction is coming. It's not going to be the drastic fall off a cliff that we saw with like cappuccinos and stuff. The Korean market, when the South Korean market opened up, the Axanthic prices went through the roof because they were just willing to pay so much more than everybody else was. And that market, now they have a lot of Axanthics and they're starting to hatch their own. So the demand from America to there isn't as high. It's softening, but there's still a huge demand for Axanthics. And because the South Korean market dominated the Axanthic market for the last 5 years, basically every other market's been kind of shut out unless somebody wanted to match the Axanthic or the Korean prices for Axanthics, which not many people did. Most of the other markets have been shut out. So if you think about how many lily whites there are, there's that much or more demand for Axanthics, but there's a 20th as many Axanthics in the world, if that. Like the price correction is going to come because Korea was just willing to pay so much more for them, but it's not going to be like falling off a cliff. There is so much demand for them. The price is going to come down, but it's going to stay strong for years to come. I really believe there's still a lot of years to come with good Axanthic prices.
Awesome. Excuse me. Now, since we're on the whole market topic there, with this whole reptile recession, how has that impacted the Crested Gecko market? The reason I ask is because in the ball python side of the industry, there's a lot of people abandoning ship, like drastically abandoning ship real quick too. But yet at shows from other people and from what I'm seeing as well, it seems like Crested Geckos are like just going at an alarming rapid pace of inclining popularity. So what's your thoughts and feelings on that?
There's definitely a market correction coming. There is for everything, though. I mean, not just reptile related. That's happened with cars, with homes, with, I don't see it as much of a recession as it is. Like a lot of people are talking about the reptile recession. I see it more as COVID just made shit go crazy. And now we're getting back to the real world.
Yes, so that's kind of how I look at it too.
It's a recession, but it's not as drastic as I think a lot of people think. And we also see this. There's a yearly cycle with cresteds because they are so easy to breed. They're so easy to get into, and they're so attractive for first-time keepers. Every single winter and early spring, We see panic on the Facebook forums where people say, oh, the market's crashed. I can't sell my geckos. The market's done. I'm getting out of the game. It's like that happens every year at this time because nobody buys geckos in February. Nobody wants to buy a gecko in January when it's so cold. You won't even get to see it for 2 more months.
Yeah.
Like there's a yearly fluctuation that freaks everybody out. And then there's going to be a 5 or 10 year fluctuation with the general economy. And then there's going to be a 20-year fluctuation because different animals get more or less popular over time. Like it's going to happen. But if if you're somebody who's just breeding on a whim and you think you're going to come in and make a ton of money the first year and then you get scared, yeah, you're going to bail and jump ship. But, I've been doing this for 15 years and some years I sell a lot better than others. But I know, like, I'm not looking at what am I going to do this year. I'm looking at, can I do this for 10 more years? Yeah, I can do this for 10 more years. I'm not too worried about, is this year slower than last year's? Next year look like it? Like this year's going to be slower than last year. And 3 years from now will probably be better than this year will be. That's just the way it works. Every industry's like that. Like, go sell anything and you're going to run into those kinds of ebbs and flows.
No, I totally agree with you that during the whole COVID aspect, because that's when I had to start getting into this whole thing, as far as breeding and everything. And, prices were at their peak at some, what I would really call, like you said, ridiculous prices. Like, it was outrageous. And this is, I think now everything's kind of like, all that free money's gone. So everybody's kind of coming back to a state of normalcy. And some people kind of forgot what normal was like because of how amazing the pinnacle of it was.
And I see this even before COVID times. I saw this and COVID exasperated it, where I always get a lot of crap when I say this, but I know it sounds harsh, but I stand by it. A lot of people don't want to put in the work. They see reptile breeding as a hobby, and then they think, oh, my hobby is going to make me money, and they treat it like a hobby, and then they don't make money, and they get real mad. It's like, no, if you want to make money doing this, it's a job. Treat it like a job.
Yep.
I just get so annoyed when I see people on Facebook forums go, well, I posted 25 geckos to Morph Market, and I've only sold 2 in the last 2 months. Well, that's all you did was put geckos on Morph Market. There are 20,000 crested geckos on Morph Market. Why should I buy yours? Make me want to buy yours. It's a job. Treat it like a job. Try real hard to make your geckos better than everyone else's.
And so you got to put that work into it. You got to do marketing. Like, there's a lot to it.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a hobby, and you just put some geckos up, and if they sell, they sell. If they don't, they don't. Great. Like, that's awesome. The world needs hobbyists, but then don't go crying on Facebook when you can't pay your mortgage with your reptiles. If you want your reptiles to pay your mortgage, treat it like your job.
Yes, totally agree. Like, at some point, I want what I'm doing here. I have, it was an 8-year plan. I'm down to 7 years now. So hopefully I get everything set up to where this will be it between the snakes and YouTube. That will be my job. But that's my ultimate goal. Now, if I can hit to where I can have to get a part-time job and then I can do this, I'm happy with that too. But like you said, I'm going into this with that goal and that thought that this is going to be my business.
Yeah.
And, just putting in that work, there's lots of times I don't get to bed till like 12 o'clock at night. I'm editing YouTube stuff, doing whatever with the snakes. Like, it is work. I enjoy it, which some people would say it's not work because I enjoy it, like my wife. But it is work nonetheless. And to me, that's how I view it, is that it is a second job for me. So I think that's you hit it right on the head with how you had put it. Living Wild says it's a full-time job. It is.
It is. I was just about to say, think about anybody who tries to start their own small business. Most of them are, I want to open a coffee shop. They're still working full-time for Comcast or something and trying to run their coffee shop at the same time. Like, nobody just quits their job and goes to open their own dry cleaners and you're making a living as a dry cleaner guy. It takes years of sacrifice and being at a loss and just dealing with it to get to the point where that's now your life. Like, that's true everywhere. but because nobody's a hobbyist dry cleaner, you don't notice it there. Like, you know, that's the case when you're trying to be a dry cleaner. When you're a hobbyist gecko breeder, it's a hard transition to make. And it takes a lot of sacrifice that honestly most people aren't willing to do.
It's, you know, you're going to miss out on family things sometimes. Like, it's, there's a lot that goes on. Like, that's another thing, how I look at it. It's like, I'm missing out on, I miss out on a lot of stuff. I'm not going to lie, folks. But I also look at this as, this is something I want to pass down to my kids too. So that way they don't have to go bust their butt at a 9-to-5 job. And I've got my daughter, which is going on 3. She really loves the snake. So I'm hoping out of my 3 kids, she's at least hopefully the one that will follow in dad's footsteps and take this over. You know, when I say finally, hey, I'm too old to be doing this crap. Here you go.
You know, worst case, even if she decides I don't want to do dad's snake business, she spent 15 years as a kid watching you bust your ass to build a business. If she doesn't want your business, she at least got a blueprint on how do I do this? How do I be successful? How do I work hard? Like, that's worth a ton just in itself, just teaching your kids that lesson.
That's actually, I never thought of it that way, but I do like that. Like, that's a good way to look at it.
I think about it because I don't really have plans to pass down this business to my kids. They're not going to want it. I'm going to sell it off before they're old enough to take it over. Like, I'm not going to do this till my kids are in their 20s. But I tell them all the time, like, why do you have to work, Dad? Why can't you play with us? My 4-year-old asks me all the time, why can't you cuddle with me and play and let's wrestle? I'm like, I can't. Daddy has to go work. Here's why Daddy has to work. Here's, like, you need to watch Daddy go bust his ass because you're going to do this someday too. You're not going to do it with geckos. You're going to do it with something else, but you need to learn how to do this.
Yeah. And I would much rather be busting my ass for myself as opposed to somebody else, making somebody else rich. I want to make me rich.
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent. I've always been like that since I was a kid.
See, throughout the years, my mindset has changed so much. Like, it started off where I just wanted to get into the workforce. I didn't really care about furthering my education beyond high school, all that stuff. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten a lot wiser really quick.
I've known this since I was a kid. I've never gone to any sort of higher education. I barely got out of high school. But from high school, my only goal was I'm going to be self-employed. I didn't know how to do it. I had no idea it would be geckos. But that's one of the things I'm most proud of in my life is I've never had a real job. I've worked part-time jobs for years. I finally just last year quit my part-time job. This is the first time I've ever been fully self-employed without a part-time job, but I've never had a full-time job.
See, that was another thing I had wanted to ask is if that you were doing this full-time, but dude, that's freaking awesome.
I should have been doing it full-time about 5 years ago, and I was too scared because I got really good health insurance working part-time at UPS, and I was too scared to leave that. And it took me, it took my life falling apart, quite honestly, to get me out of there. And I should have done it years and years ago, and I just was too scared to do it. I should have done it a long time ago, but it was worth it now that I did.
See, I can see that aspect of it. You know, I can understand that. Health benefits are a big deal.
It is. It was terrifying giving those up. But when it got to the point that I didn't have a choice and I had to do it, then it was like once I ripped that Band-Aid off, it was like, oh, God, I should have done this 5 years ago. My life is so much better not going to work.
What was I so afraid of? Danny here says, do you recommend bioactive setups or just paper towel and glass tank?
I would say it depends on how many animals you have. If you have a reasonable amount of animals that many bioactive tanks are feasible, I would do bioactive. If you have more animals than doing bioactive tanks is reasonable for, I would actually do plastic tubs and paper towels or newspaper or pre-cut liners, anything like that.
Okay. Now, how's your setup and everything for how you're doing your whole operation? What are you using?
Everything's in like big plastic Sterilite tubs, and I actually order butcher paper from Uline. So it's the same material as newspaper. It's just not printed. I order big blocks of butcher paper from Uline, and they actually make a pre-cut one that is basically the size that I need. I fold one corner down to make it fit.
Okay. See, there again, I never would have thought of. I would have thought, geckos, it would have been like a whole bunch of little exoterras around.
No, I have way too many. I mean, in a ideal world, I would love that, but I've got 4,000 geckos here. I can't do exoterras. I'd go broke.
Oh, gee. That was one of my other questions was, how big's your collection? But holy crap, 4,000.
Right now I've got about as many as I've had in a long time. I'm running max capacity right now.
Wow.
Normally I sit between 2,500 and 3,000, but last year I hatched a lot of babies. So I've got a lot. I'm planning on doing more reptile expos this year than I have, so I'm growing more stuff out to be able to stock these expos that I want to do. So I've got more animals than I want to, honestly, but I've got plans for them all, so I think it'll work.
What expos can people expect to see at this year?
So I'm going to be at the Flora and Fauna Expo in New York, is the one I was telling you about. I'm going to do I want to do the Reptilian Nation show here in Denver in April, if they'll ever email me back and give me a booth. I've been trying to get a hold of them for 3 weeks, and I can't get an email back. But in theory, I'll be at the Denver Reptilian Nation show, and then I'm going to do the Anaheim Super Show in July, and I'll be at Tinley in October.
Okay, nice.
I'll be at the Daytona show in August, but not vending. I'm just going to go check that one out.
Okay.
The other ones I'll be vending at.
Drippy Exotic says Florida Fauna Conference. I guess maybe they're going to be there. Florida Fauna.
Yeah, that's the one in New York that I'm real excited about. That's going to be a fun show.
See, that's when you're like, how many geckos do you take with you to your typical show? Like,
so I did the Vegas Expo last September, and that was the first time I vended a show in like 7 years.
Oh, okay.
So I don't really have a typical show. I don't do shows. This is the first time I've really started doing shows again. This year, like the Flora and Fauna show, I'm not going to bring too many. It's a smaller, more boutique style show. I'll probably bring about 40 geckos to that, but they'll be all fairly high-end geckos. The Anaheim Super Show is the big one. That one I'll bring 200, 250 geckos, somewhere in that range.
Oh, wow.
And then Tinley I'll probably bring. I've only got two. The Anaheim show, I'll have a full end cap, so I'll have a ton of space. Tinley, I've got 2 tables, so I'll probably bring 100, 150 geckos, something like that.
Okay, wow, man. That's still a lot of animals, dude.
Like I said, I got a lot of geckos. I'm trying to plan ahead so I don't get to Tinley and be like, well, crap, I don't have any geckos. I have tables, but nothing to sell. Like, I don't want to get to there.
Funny thing is, I ran into that problem. Like, I have a show this coming this Saturday at Gettysburg Reptile Expo LLC, and I have nothing for sale now. Like, I sold the last snake I had on my Morph market like last week, so I legit have an empty table. So luckily, my one friend said, "Hey, I have snakes that you could sell if you want to put them on your table." He goes, I'll cut you in a little bit on it. It's like, hey. See, I've got nothing else to sell. So, hey, man, give me some snakes. We'll see what we can do.
That works.
But it was like, it's a good problem, but it's a bad problem at the same time. Now, like, it sucks to an extent having that standing inventory, but at the same token, it's nice for shows that you have an inventory.
Yeah.
Ball Lab says, hopefully you get into Reptilian Nation. I would love to see you there.
I would love to be. I'm assuming I will. I think I've been told by a few people that they can be a bit slow to respond to emails and requests, but I can't imagine that they're not going to check for new vendors at some point.
You would think that they would be into trying to get as many other different breeders in there than ball python breeders, and because, I mean, let's face it, like most shows anymore are like 98% ball pythons. Like, I love them, folks, but I'm not gonna lie. It does it's nice to see a variety of different animals.
It's nice to have a variety.
What's one underrated morph that you think that not many people are working with that you think has a whole bunch of potential to it?
Trying to think of what I think that would be right now. Historically, my answer for that was Super Dalmatians, because that was true for years and years. and now those are gaining in popularity. I still think red spot, I call them confetti Dalmatians, where their Dalmatian spots are red instead of black.
Ooh.
Those are really popular, but they're not very common still.
Okay.
I think like they're, when I have them for sale, they're pretty popular. They're pretty easy sales, but there's just not a lot of other people that are really focusing real hard on those still, which kind of baffles me that they're not. The ink spots, the big black spots are real popular, and I'm like, man, I like the red spots better. I don't know why people aren't focusing on those as hard as they are the ink spots.
I would think like if you would put like red spots on like a very dark gecko, like the charcoals or the super charcoals that you were talking about, I would think that would be like top notch right there with those. Like,
cool. I've been trying for years to get red spots on a yellow gecko because almost all my confetti ones are like this picture here where they have a red base. This guy has big, I can't point right because it's backwards. He has big white portholes too, but he has big red spots, but they're all on a red based gecko. So when they fire up, their base color is bright red and the spots kind of disappear a little bit. So I've been, for like 10 years, I've been trying to get bright red spots on a yellow gecko because it would pop so much more. And it's been a pain in the butt trying to get it done, but it's coming along.
Now, when you say get them fired up, what do you get? Like, explain that to me, because I've heard that multiple times.
So they get brighter and like duller and brighter based on different factors. Like if they're really stressed out or scared, they call it being fired up, where their colors get real bright, the darks get darker, the reds get brighter. They just get more vibrant, basically. And you can do a number of different things can affect that. Like at nighttime, they tend to get more fired up. If the humidity gets really high, they get fired up. If they're really scared or stressed out, they get fired up. So to get them as fired up as I can, I generally pack them in deli cups and put them in a box like I'm going to ship them, because that's the most fired up you'll ever see them is generally when you get them shipped in, because they've been in a wet, moist, dark deli cup getting bounced around in a FedEx truck for 24 hours.
That's stressful enough. Yeah.
I've always told people, if you can't, like some people complain, I can't get this gecko to fire up for pictures. It just doesn't look good. I'm like, pack it up in a shipping box, put it in your car, and just go drive around the block for 10 minutes. Like let it kind of bounce around in the back seat. Not like bounce around violently, but you can feel it's moving. Let it bounce around in the back seat and then take it home, unpack it, and it'll be fired up.
Interesting. Okay. See, I was curious as to what, if it was somewhere you just had to randomly catch them or if there's a way to stimulate it.
Yeah, UV light works. So I have some friends that'll, their way is put them in a wet deli cup and put them under a real bright UV light, and the UV light makes them fire up. That's never worked. Different things work for different people. I've tried that and it doesn't work as good for me as just boxing them up and putting them in a dark closet for half an hour. But for them, it works great.
Hey, there's more than one way to do everything.
Exactly.
Exactly. Eric here, Drop Time says, at what price do you think is the beginning of a high-end gecko?
That's hard to answer because it depends on the morph, the sex, and the time. Like 10 years ago, anything over $300 doesn't matter what it was a high-end gecko. There was a point when I was first doing this that $1,000 gecko was unheard of. That was just like you saw one or two of those a year and you just said nasty things about whoever bought it because that's ridiculous to pay $1,000 for a crested gecko. Now that's nothing for some of these morphs. So it kind of depends. Like right now, males have a bigger split because most males are harder to sell because you need more females than you do boys. So low-end males are all really low priced, but then there's not many like middle priced males, and then you get to the really nice ones and they have the highest price because everybody wants a really nice male. Whereas females, they have a more even price distribution. So there's some low-end females, a lot of stuff in the middle ground, and then really nice females command a really nice price. Like I said, the males don't really have that middle ground. So males, anything like there seems to be a big jump between like $200 and $500 for a lot of morphs. That there's just not much in that middle ground. There's some $200 to $300 stuff and a lot of $500 to $1,000 stuff. but there's nothing in the middle ground because you're either looking for a pet that's $150 or you're looking for a really nice investment breeder male. Females, it's a lot harder to answer that because you can get a female priced anywhere.
Okay. Now, what does an Exantic roughly go for? Because I know Danny's going to try to talk me into an Exantic. I want to make sure he doesn't rake me over the coals with it.
Right now, Exantic babies, hatchlings. So I generally don't sell hatchlings. I have a ton of grow out space, so I grow almost everything up to sub-adult or adult size.
Okay.
So the baby market I'm not as in touch with because I don't really work in it, but I've seen Exantic babies going between, I think the last one I saw was 7,000. I would imagine most of them are going between 6,000 and 10,000 depending on quality.
Wow.
A ready to breed adult male can push 25,000.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now, that's what it's been. I do think there's a price correction coming, so I would expect that to come down by 25 or 30% over the next year. Like I said, not a huge drop, but I do think those prices are going to come back to earth a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I figured that they would probably be a little pricey, but whoa, okay.
Yeah, they get up there.
I was gonna, man, that's just like, I know when I tell people about the prices of like some of the snakes and stuff that I'm working with and what I'm hoping to produce, like their minds, like they look at me like, you're like, how? But then I hear just what you just said, and I think about this little crested gecko. It's like, how?
There's like the Exantic at the height of like crested gecko fever during the pandemic, like last fall, at the height when it got real crazy. Exantic lily whites, like sub-adult males, not even ready to breed. This is a ridiculous. I struggle with pricing with reptiles because it's just it's uncomfortable, right? These are live animals, and it's just weird that they sell for this much. So I'll tell this story because it's funny, but it's uncomfortable. I did a podcast where somebody was asking me about the Exantic lily whites, and it was right after the Tinley show, and I told him I'd sold an Exantic lily white for 37,000, and I saw one sell at Tinley for 44, I think it was, like 42 or 44. And the guy doing the podcast with me was like, "Oh, I want to see one sell for 50. Like that would just make me happy. I just want to see a crested gecko sell for 50." So the next lily white Exantic I put up for sale, I put it up for 50 just to see, mostly because this guy said you should just try to see if you can get 50 grand from them. Sold 3 of them. It was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. So, like I said, that was COVID fever. Like that's all coming back down to earth now. But it's you tell that to people, and it's just like people don't believe you, right? People look at you like they're nuts.
Yeah, wow.
It's madness.
What's the lifespan on one of these? Like, I'm just trying to figure, like
20 years.
Okay. So, all right, they're right there with
snakes. If you keep them healthy and treat them right, they'll breed for 12 to 15 years, no problem.
Okay. I was gonna say, if you're spending like that much money, it's like this thing's it better have a
it's an investment.
But still, whoa. Oh man, you must have been doing the happy dance on that one.
I've been telling people for a while now, I am dead convinced my life is a video game. Like there is a 16-year-old kid somewhere who thinks this is just fucking hilarious. I told a friend the other day I was talking to my lawyer, I think it was, and she had gotten into my books. She's like, "You do what for a living? And this is real?" And I told her, I'm convinced like any moment now I'm gonna wake up and realize like I'm a butterfly that licked the wrong mushroom because this is not real. Like this is a real vivid dream that can't be real. This is craziness.
Dude,
I think a lot of people in the reptile world have felt like that the last 2 years or so.
I was gonna say there's like I have yet to produce anything what I would consider high end by any means. Like I've produced something that was close to 1,000 and I held it back.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just, wow. It is hard. Like I was saying, people that I know, I tell them, what my plans are. Excuse me. And they just look at me like I'm crazy. And it's like, no, it's like legit. It's like, this is my plan to get out of excavating and doing construction. It's like, this is it.
Yep.
They're like, there's no way. It's like, you just watched. It's like,
I've been through that. I remember when I told people, I'm going to breed lizards for a living. And they went, you didn't do what now? Come on, dude.
Yep. It's a whole hidden world.
Yep.
Angie, Jeff, what's up, my brother and sister? Thanks for tuning in, guys. Good to see ya. Let's see here. The chat was going off like crazy. Let's see here. All right, Eric says, how many are you gonna buy, Jeremy? 1.4, a nice colony. Oh, Eric, man, at 50 grand, I believe I would be homeless and divorced.
There were people like during the height of COVID time, there were people that would hit me up and be like, hey, I want like a 1.3 group of ready to breed Axanthics. I know the price. I'm ready to buy. And I'd be like, I don't have any. And they'd be like, okay, so give me your price and I'll buy them. I'm like, dude, it's not the money. I promise you at 25 grand a piece, if I had 6 of these to sell you, I would. Like, offering more money is not the answer. I don't have the animals to sell you. And they would just be like, okay, I'll give you more money. I'm like, great. I'd love to take it. I don't have any more. You don't have to argue me into taking your money. I don't have animals for you.
It's like, trust me, you don't. It's like you can keep cranking this number up all you want. It doesn't change the fact there's no supply for the demand.
Exactly. It was funny. There was times when people were just like didn't understand. Like, how what do you mean you don't have any? I don't have any.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that they're probably something that they're kind of hard to hit. Am I wrong? I mean, if they're selling for that, there's got to be some challenges to produce it.
They're not that they're just simple recessive. They're not that challenging to produce. A big part of it is I was very careful, to pat myself on the back a little bit. I never wanted to just breed the crap out of these and flood the market. And I'd make a bunch of money at the beginning and do well for myself and nobody else would. Because we've seen that happen with countless morphs, right? I've talked about other gecko morphs that's happened with right now. From the very beginning when I first got these I was very, very conscious that I want this to be a slow burn. I want people who are willing to invest at a good price to reap the benefits of that investment. Like, I do not want this to be a quick wave that I make a bunch of money and everybody else gets burned. I've tried. That's a big part of why it's gone like this is I've never hatched a ton of these animals to try and maximize on it all I can. And a lot of people told me that was dumb 10 years ago when I started breeding them. And now that's 10 years later and they're selling like mad for all this money. I'm like, well, doesn't seem like it was so dumb. Now we're all winning. Like, I'm making plenty. I have no complaints, and a lot of other people are too. Like, I feel a lot better about that than I would have doing it the other way.
Lindsay, totally agree, girl. Totally agree. We are all blessed in this industry. That there actually, you just kind of segued right into another topic that I wanted to cover is, what are your thoughts on the crested gecko market as far as like the return on investment on animals, and then how do I want to put it? Because like with ball pythons, it seems like you start producing something, you release it, and it seems like everybody else and their brother jumps on the bandwagon, and the price just drives down real super quick. And you had said that you're very, you kind of let yours go out slowly. So what's your thoughts on everybody kind of jumping on the crested bandwagon and your thoughts on how that's going to go?
It doesn't seem to be as big of a deal in crested geckos. I think historically because they haven't been as popular as ball pythons. Ball pythons were always the overbred, easy to do, get rich quick scheme type animal. And I think it attracted a lot of those type of people that would breed a bunch of them and then panic when the price is going down and it would just be a race to the bottom. Like, that hasn't historically happened with crested geckos.
Okay.
So I don't like, you get a lot of those people that panic and just sell everything off. And the other part of it is the market is so big. I had a breeder, I won't say names, but I had a breeder once who got mad at me for something, and they were another prominent axanthic breeder, and they made a threat at some point that had made its way back to me through the grapevine of, well, I don't really care because I've made enough money and I'm just going to tank the axanthic price because fuck Brian. And I was just like, hey, like, dick move for one, but also you could, like, you just don't understand the demand for these things. You could sell your entire collection for a third of the price that I'm asking, and you're still not going to make a dent in the market. Like, you don't have the ability to tank the market. And it's like outside of the cappuccino thing where they were being produced by the guys who supply Petco and are hatching 50,000 geckos a year. Like, those guys bred the crap out of cappuccinos, not really knowing what it was, and flooded the market. Outside of that situation, there's not one breeder who has the ability to really tank the market in that big a way, which I think is kind of built-in protections for that kind of thing.
That's a neat aspect to it, too, because it seems like I said, like with the ball pythons, it seems like one person hops, like it becomes a new hot thing, and then the gene starts up here, and it's like a very rapid decline in price real quick, and it's kind of sad to see. But it's nice that you don't think that the crested gecko market will kind of fall into that same.
Yeah, like, it hasn't gone that way historically. And then, it's not to say that it couldn't at some point, but historically, like I said, outside of cappuccinos, that just doesn't tend to happen with cresties. And I'm hopeful that it won't fall into that pattern. I don't see that getting to be that big of an issue with us.
See, that's cool. I think that's really neat. Let's see here. Since we kind of been jumping around here on my notes and stuff. Covered that. All right. How long do you wait to list your animals? I know you briefly had mentioned it, but what's your kind of reasoning for waiting so long to list them and everything?
So these guys change a lot as they grow, especially some morphs like Dalmatians don't look anything when they hatch like they do when they're adults. And a lot of it was just, I just got tired of selling animals as babies because I needed the space or needed the money or whatever. And then it gets to be older and I'm like, well, crap, that's better than the one I kept. It was just like, it seemed so obvious to me that that's a poor business strategy. Like, I should just find a way to keep as many as I can until I know what they're going to be as adults. And then I can pick which ones I want to keep.
That makes sense.
It seemed to make the most sense to me.
Now I'll look at this from the carpet python aspect, because carpet pythons, when they hatch, that's the ugliest that snake's going to look.
Yeah.
Because when they hatch, they're like very drab, earthy tones. And as they get older, they come into their adult colors, and that's the best that they're going to look. I apologize for the thumping. My daughter's apparently.
So I'm sure you can hear my kids. They're going crazy upstairs too.
All right. Well, at least I'm not the only one then. Like, it sounded like she was like right there. But yeah, like the carpet pythons, as they age, they only get better. Mm-hmm. So the cresties are kind of along that same line then.
Yeah, they're similar. They go through a phase like they start kind of ugly and drab, and then they get nice. And then usually at about between 5 and 8 years old, they start to come back down. Okay. Where their colors start to brown out. Like the real bright reds don't fire up bright red anymore. They still produce the same offspring, but they don't look like it. They get uglier as they get older. So there's a sweet spot between like a year and a half and 5 years old that they look their absolute best. But if you're selling them, you're not going to keep a gecko for 6 years before you sell it. That would just be ridiculous. So that doesn't matter. And if you're keeping it to breed, well, I don't care if it browns out and gets ugly because the offspring are still just as nice. So it doesn't matter that it's now 7 years old and doesn't look as good. It still breeds great, and the offspring still look that good. So it doesn't end up mattering.
And from the pet keeper aspect, you had it during its best, and you've grown that attachment to it, so you really don't care by that point what it really looks like. Well, you're getting old, I'm getting old. I obviously don't look as good as I did 5 years ago.
I was about to say, I don't look as good as I did 6 years ago either.
So I think that's very, very good good thought there. Everybody, if you got any questions in the chat, Make sure to drop them. Also, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, please. Also, make sure you guys check out the sponsors of this week's episode. I think I missed this. I apologize, Ball Labs. I had it started and we just kind of went off and kept going. But they said, Ball Labs said, tip for shows: bring a couple high end and then the rest of the table keep it under 2,000. Won't be like the Reptile Super Show you were at. Okay.
All right.
Let's see here. A1 Genetics, what's up? Thanks for tuning in. Greatly appreciate you stopping by. Yeah, everybody, if you got any questions for Brian, now is the time to hit this man up if you want to pick his brain on anything. For a first-time Exantic breeder, what would you get? Hets? What would you get? Hets to Hets or Exantic to Hets?
I would always go Exantic to Hets if you can afford it. I'm a huge proponent. I actively try not to breed anything that's going to give me possible hets, just because in my mind it makes it so much messier. I don't think it's worth the return for the dramatic price drop that comes with possible hets. And it's just annoying when you start having to grow out possible hets and then try and breed them to prove them out and it doesn't prove out. If financially that's what you need to do it, because there's nothing wrong with it. But if you have the ability to get a visual Exantic to breed, I would always go that way if it's possible. If it's not possible, yeah, head-to-heads are still a great way to go. There is a bit more intrigue behind it because you don't know what's going to pop out, and it's, you know, more to play with, possible hets, and you can try and breed them out, and there is a sense of elation, I guess, that would come with, you know, hatching something that's a possible het, and then you prove it out down the road. Like, that would be a great feeling too. So there's nothing wrong with it, but like I said, in my mind, if you can afford the visual, I would always go for it.
Okay, and then they follow up with, would you get a female Exantic or a male Exantic?
So this one's hard because traditionally you always say spend. I always told people when you're breeding a gecko business or whatever, you're building out your breeding collection, I always tell people spend the most you possibly can on the nicest male you possibly can, and then get the best females you can still afford to go with him.
Okay.
But Exanthics are a bit weird because visual Exanthic males aren't drastically more than visual females are, but het females are drastically more than het males are. So in theory, you could get an Exanthic male, but then you need to overpay for het Exanthic females because they're in such demand. They're 5 times the price of a male. Het males are cheap. Het females are ridiculous. Whereas if you get a het male, you're going to end up spending more money because now you need to buy 2 or 3 visual females, but they're not overpriced. They're comparatively pretty close to what visual males are. So you're going to spend more money, but you're going to get a better collection out of it, if that makes sense. I just think
that what you're saying.
Females are they're in such demand. They command such a high price. It's the only one that it makes me think it might be worth flipping that and do it the other way and get nicer females.
See, that's kind of like, for me, I always look at it this way for ball pythons. Your females always genuinely cost more than your males do. So your visual female is going to be, you know, I'm going to say a quarter of the price more than if you got that female as a het. So I always like to have the het and the female, spend the money on the powerhouse male, because you can put him to just about anybody else then that works in your project. So it makes more sense to have the power male and that het female.
Yeah, that's the other side of that argument I just made is, well, if you get the visual male, you cannot overspend on a bunch of het females, breed him to 6 other just whatever geckos, and make a crap ton of hets for yourself. It draws your timeline out, but now you're getting a bunch of hets for free. So it all depends on what your finances are and what your timeline is.
Yeah. Now, how long does it take to get a female up to maturity?
Usually right at 2 years.
Okay.
I breed them. Right. So my guidelines are they have to weigh at least 45 grams and they have to be at least 2 years old. Sometimes you'll get ones that in 2 years they're not quite big enough. Sometimes you'll get one that are, you know, they're 45, 50 grams at a year and a half. And I'm like, well, I'm still going to wait a while just because you just need to be a bit older. I've learned the hard way. It's worth waiting because if you breed girls young, generally their first year, it's hard to get consistent good eggs out of them, and you end up wasting that first year anyways. Versus if you wait, you're wasting that year because you're not even breeding them. But after that, they're going to be much better producers.
I gotcha. That makes sense there too. It does. Eric here wants to know: do you prefer to feed any specific kind of bug, cricket, dubia?
So I feed crickets just because with so many animals, dubia aren't a realistic option for me. I would do dubias. They would be my insect of choice if it was feasible to feed this many geckos with dubias. It's just not. It's too expensive. They're too hard to feed off. Crickets are just way cheaper and easier. I tried mealworms for a while because they're even cheaper. And the big thing with mealworms is I can get them shipped in any weather, whereas crickets, it's a pain in the butt to get them shipped in. And the shipping's godly expensive because there's no good cricket breeders anywhere near me. They all kind of end up coming from Georgia or something. Like, crickets are a pain in the butt. But I tried mealworms, and I just wasn't liking the results of my animals. I was starting to get some calcium issues. I don't think the mealworms were holding enough of a calcium load that I needed. It just didn't, just health-wise, I was noticing things with the animals that I was like, I'm not comfortable with this. It's not worth the trade-off. So I went back to crickets.
Now, do you dust the crickets then with like a vitamin powder, or?
I do. I dust them. I used the Repashy Calcium Plus.
Okay. Because I know that was one. I know like leopard geckos are a big one that I know of anyway, off the top of my head, that gets that metabolic bone disease type of deal.
Yeah, crusties do too. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Eric here wants to know, when doing shows, do you prefer cups or PVC setups for geckos? That's a good question because I was wondering that as well.
I do both. So I kind of do it by price tier. So I've got 6 PVC display cases and 3 deli cup holders. Oh, are we back? Oh, I lost you.
Yeah, we're good.
So I do the PVC cases I like because you can put locks on them. So it kind of started on one end of the table and moved down, and I do it by price. Some people arrange it by Morph or whatever. I arrange it by price. So the highest price stuff starts over here in locked cages and moves down, and then eventually it gets into they're just display holders for deli cups. So you still have to open the lid on the holder to get the cups out, and that gives you some security that people have to try and open it to get your animals out. And then if I have more animals than I have cases or display cases for, the cheapest stuff will be on loose deli cups on the end of the table.
Okay.
Those ones, obviously, it's the easiest just for someone to pick it up and grab it and walk away, but that's why they're the lowest priced ones go over there.
So yeah, that's why if someone's gonna steal something, you don't want them stealing your $20,000.
Exactly. Those ones all get lock and key. Which those still make me paranoid. So I'm like, well, somebody could just pick the whole display case up and walk off with it, and the whole show I'm like watching it.
I know.
Part of why I didn't vend shows for 8 years.
When I set it up for my first show, took all the animals there, left them in the displays overnight, and I'm there thinking in the back of my head, it's like, what if someone pays off the security guard and they just come in and just, walk off? It's like acrylic displays aren't hard to break into.
Yeah, when I did the Vegas show last year, I took everything back to the hotel room with me. We got there Friday, set everything up, and then I just picked the whole display case up and packed them up and took them back to the hotel room with us. I was like, I'm sure the hotel wouldn't like that if they knew about it, but I'm not leaving all these animals. I just didn't feel comfortable with it.
I don't blame you on that one, especially with some of those prices that you were saying earlier. Yeah. No.
And you said, I don't know. Going back. What if they're all well-intentioned, but somebody forgets to lock a door or something? It's like, I don't like putting that kind of risk in someone else's hands. I'd rather have it in my own.
I totally agree with you on that one. A1 Genetics wants to know, Brian, you working on making red fraps?
Yes, I am. I actually went out and bought a bunch of lily whites because I didn't have enough of my own. So last year I ordered a big wholesale pack of lily whites that I picked out all the best ones and kept them all. So I have about 25 new lily white females that are going to breed this year. A handful of those are going to go to new axanthic lines, and the rest are all going to go with the cappuccino lines to make a whole bunch of really cool frappuccinos.
Nice.
So I basically kept all the nicest lily whites and everything that was either red or orange base color.
Okay. So, dude, I hear like your last video that I watched to help prep for some of this, some of the stuff you were uploading onto your store there sounded like lily white. There was a lot of demand for lily white stuff.
Yeah, there still is. Like I said, it's not what it was the last 5 years, but there's still a lot of demand for them. They're just such gorgeous animals. It's hard not to want them.
Lindsay says, awesome podcast, Jeremy and Brian. Thank you. Juliana said, a super Dalmatian Axanthic is basically the best idea ever, and it's just like a panda pod except in reverse.
That's the idea.
So I'm glad you guys are enjoying the cast, Lindsay. I really, really do appreciate that. Thank you. Eric here said, blend the dubia in your food mix. That's a thought, too. I guess if you wanted to do that.
I did that with crickets. For a while, I experimented with buying freeze-dried crickets and blending them into the food. Oh,
okay. Now, did the geckos still eat it as normal, or were they kind of put off by it?
They were put off a little bit. They don't eat it as like they're not much different than us. The sweeter the food, the more of it they're going to eat. But also, the sweeter the food is, the less healthy it is. So it's easier to get them to eat the most sweet foods that all these companies make, but they're generally healthier if you use the ones that are based. A lot of the pre-made gecko diets too, you can get ones that come with insect protein blended in, and they usually use black soldier fly larvae for that. So most foods that I use do have insect protein included.
All right, awesome. Good night, Jim. Thanks for tuning in tonight, bro. Greatly appreciate it. Everybody, I got like 2 more questions for Brian here. So if you guys have any more questions you want to pick his brain on, now is the time to start dropping those questions. Brian, what amount of space do you need to have a, I'm going to say a nice collection of breeding Cresties? Like how big of a room are you thinking, or how much space to have a decent collection to breed with?
Decent collection to breed with. I'd say I've seen a lot of people that just do it out of like if they have a study in their house or like a guest bedroom. Like, let's get real here, guys. How often do you have guests over? Not that often. And how often do those guests, they're like people that you don't want? Like, do you really want your mother-in-law coming over twice a year? Would you tell her, hey, get yourself a hotel, the geckos are in that room, just helping everybody out? That's the way to go. A lot of people do that. Like, if you have a spare bedroom, you can fit a good number of animals and have a good. And it's also easy when you have them all in one spare bedroom to temperature regulate that room on its own. Makes it real simple. Versus I've seen people have it kind of spread in bits and pieces all over the house. It makes it a lot harder. Like, just get yourself nice one spare bedroom, close it up, put a little heater in there, get a nice thermostat. You can get little standalone ACs if you need to cool it down in the summer. That's the way to go.
Okay, nice. Now, how much holdback space do you keep?
I have a ton because I feel like that's kind of my, the reason I bought the place that I'm in now is I was shopping for a place that I'd have enough space for a lot of holdbacks. So most people don't hold back too many. Like, they pick out their nicest babies and hold them back, and then, maybe I'll keep half of these to breed. I hold back all of everything. Like, right, I have space at max capacity. I can grow. God, I want to say, because I can refresh the rooms twice a year, so I can grow 1,200, 1,400 geckos a year to max size.
Okay.
Like, but that's the way I want to do it. I love that, and for me, that's half the fun. Is like, it's no fun to hatch this animal and then it just leaves. So I'm like, I want to see them grow up. I love to watch them grow and develop. And what are you going to turn into as an adult? That's half this business side. It's fun. It's more fun that way. I want to see how they turn out.
That is probably the one downfall, like for me personally, like with breeding ball pythons and stuff, is that there's so much time, and like they do go through a drastic change from babies to adults.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes you wonder, well, if I would have kept that, what would that have looked like as an adult? And it kind of, you kick yourself in the butt sometimes.
Yeah.
But at the same token, it's like, depending what scale you're working with, I mean, they take up a lot of space. And it's like, you got to kind of pick and choose and just kind of hope that, hey, whoever you got it from, maybe they'll send you pictures, as the thing grows and you can see. And then if you produce again, okay, I need to hold that back.
Yeah. No, there's one in particular, a girl named Stephanie had bought from me that every time she posts it, I repost it or duet her TikTok or just send her a message going like, I screwed that up. Why did I sell that animal? I've offered to buy it back several times. It's like a game we play back and forth that I want that gecko back, and she teases me that I can't have it. That's one of the few that I really regret selling.
Living Wild says, great podcast. Thank you, guys. Brian, we will see you in a few days in Africa. What? You're going to Africa?
That's my friends Paul and Georgina. So on top of the gecko business, I run a travel business too. I call them adventure retreats. I build a trip. Most of them I do in Belize. I take people to Belize and we spend 5 days hiking through the rainforest and make you hike up a mountain and throw you off a waterfall. We go out at night and look for snakes and crocodiles and stuff.
All right. What does something like that remotely cost? Because that would be freaking phenomenal and awesome.
So I don't have another Belize one on the books. My life kind of got jumbled around a little bit recently, so I haven't been able to plan one. I'm hoping I can do one again in August or so. I usually do one, and it's usually for a double occupancy room. So if it's like you and your wife or something, it runs, I want to say it was $2,800 per person, and it's all inclusive, everything but your flight, basically.
That's not bad.
It's admittedly more of a passion project. I generally don't make money running these tours. Like if I don't get them fully booked out, I end up losing money on it. But I'm like, it's fun. I've met some of my favorite people, like Paul and Georgina. I love those guys. I met them on one of my retreats. This will be their third one they've done with me now. This is the first one I've done in Africa.
Okay.
I haven't done one over there yet. We're going to Kenya for 8 days on safari in Kenya.
Oh, dude,
it's
is
a
there
good
anything in particular you're looking to see in Africa, like that you really want to?
I really want to see leopards. The last time I went there in June, because I met the guys that I'm running it through, but I wanted to go and make sure, like, I'm not going to take people to go see some dude in Africa that says he's going to run these tours for me, and then he tries to take our kidneys. Like, I'm gonna go do that myself before I bring other people out there. So I went out and did it. Me and my dad went out and met the tour operators that I'm working with last June, and did a few days out there with them. And the only thing I didn't see that I wanted to was a leopard. So I'm hoping this time we'll get to find some leopards.
That dude. All right, you got my wheels turning on this. I gotta talk with the wife. Maybe I can finagle a friend, another one of my friends to come along too. Bring his wife, and the wives can go do something while we all go find snakes and all that good stuff.
I can do I pre-build ones and put them on my website and sell them to just anybody. And then I've also done a couple of times custom built ones where I just get a group of people that they all want to go to Belize, and I'm like, all right, I can build us an itinerary and we can go island hopping, we can go snorkeling, we can go hiking in the jungle, we can go to Mayan ruins, we can go out herping. Yeah, that's what I
like. I say, if I tell her that that it's a tax write-off, that might be that nice little hook set.
To be fair, I don't want to get too involved here, but to be fair, I tried that trick once and I'm not married anymore, so I don't know if I go down that
route. Although if I tell her that the business is paying for it, I don't know if she can really argue that fact.
That was the running joke with me, was that I go on vacation as much as I possibly can. And I decided that wasn't enough. So I just started another business where I go on vacation more and call it a business. That's the running joke about it, which realistically, that's what it is. Like I said, it's not a money-making venture. It's a passion venture. my whole thing is if I can do it and I lose less money than it would have cost me to do the vacation on my own anyways, that's a win.
Yeah. But see, no, that's it lets you get out and experience, like, see other parts of the world and do and share what you love with other people as well. That's a dude, like,
that's what started it for me. I found myself in 2019 in Belize, lost in the jungle, out of water, overheated, dehydrated, going, oh, I'm on a path, so I'm not lost. I just don't know how to get back to the hotel.
I just don't know where they're going.
I tried to get to a waterfall that they told me was a 45-minute hike away. 2.5 hours later, I'm bleeding from thorn scratches, and I find this waterfall completely deserted. I haven't seen another human in 3 hours. And I was like, this is incredible. I got to bring other people out here to do this. It was one of the most incredible experiences I've ever had, and I decided I got to share this with some people. We got to do this.
All right. I love that story. I'm pretty sure that in itself that will make my wife not want to come along.
The first thing I do, the Belize trips, the first thing I do is I bring us all. We go to this lodge it's in the national park in the jungle. We go up there and then I sit everybody down in the little. They call it the conference room, but it's really just like a hut with a couple couches and you can hang out in there. And I sit everybody down. I go, okay, give me your waivers because everybody has to sign waivers. It's not my fault. And then I tell them, I say, I'm going to hurt you. This is the first thing I tell people when we get there. So I'm going to hurt you. This is going to suck. You're going to get bug bitten. You're going to be exhausted. You're going to be overheated. And it's going to hurt. But I promise if you stick with me and get to where we're going and do these hikes, it is worth it. You will absolutely love it.
Dude, you've got my interest perked on this one. It's something I'm definitely. It probably wouldn't be this year, but I might see if I can't swing this for next year and figure something out.
Yeah, hit me up. We'll talk. I'm hoping now. I'm really have plans. I'm hoping at the second half of this year, I want to revamp this business a little bit and make it more focused, a little more intentional, take it more seriously, and really see if I can create something with it. I have a lot of ideas. It's just I haven't had the ability to really bring them to life in the last few years, and now I'm hoping I can get that done.
Dude, I think you've got a great thing going there with that. Like, that's just awesome. That's all I can say, man. That is awesome.
I've got ideas of how I want to take it and really make it, like I said, more focused and do it in a way that people can get more out of it. I have some ideas. I'm really hoping to be able to work with that more.
Dude, kudos to you, man. That is freaking amazing. Lindsay here says, Jay, you have to do Kenya. It is the best experience. Your wife will love it. Lindsay, I don't know. Kara's afraid of bugs, and
Kenya's actually that's the one to do, because in Kenya, most of the time you're just in a safari truck driving around through the national parks, because they're national parks. You can't really get out and go hike. They're afraid something's going to eat you. So it's a much tamer trip because you're just hanging out in a truck driving around on a game drive. She'd actually like that one a lot more than Belize. She wouldn't like Belize.
Yeah, she would probably like that one more than Belize. But I think she, like, other than the hiking aspect, because Belize, I'm sure it's got like beautiful birds and all. Oh yeah,
we can do anything in Belize. There's beaches. We can do snorkeling, swimming with dolphins, spearfishing, just laying on a beach all day. Like we can build whatever kind of trip you guys want. I'm also hoping to start doing Costa Rica. I actually, because I'm a masochist against myself and I like being so busy I can't breathe. 4 days after I get back from Africa, I get on a plane to Costa Rica to go look at a property down there and hopefully be able to spend some of my time down there and start putting together a tour in Costa Rica. One's going to be a fun one.
Okay. See, that would be, man. Oh, you got my wheels turning on this one. I'm definitely, after we wrap this up, that's going to be the first thing I'm going to go out there and be like, which do you want, Belize, Africa, or Costa Rica? Where would you like to go? Oh, man. Brian, that's freaking awesome. All right, I got one more question for you. Everybody in the chat, if you guys have any questions for Brian, now is the time to drop them. Living Wild says, LOL, lots of times. Brian has no chill when it comes to travel. Envious. My last question for you, Brian, is what types of tips could you give anybody wanting to get into crested geckos as far as keeping, breeding, any of that stuff?
So the biggest tip I always give is, I learned this one the hard way myself. If you're getting into it with the intention of breeding, plan out your breeding projects first and then buy the animals to fill out your projects. I did it the other way, where I ran around like a freaking maniac as a 19-year-old kid and went, that one's pretty, that one's pretty, that one's pretty. And then I ended up with 60 geckos, half of which didn't fit into any coherent breeding project. And then I needed to get 60 more geckos to build projects or sell the stuff you just bought. Like, it makes so much more sense. Like, literally, I learned the hard way. I sat down at one point with a pen and paper and physically wrote out every breeding project I wanted to accomplish, what males I had, what males I needed, what females I had, what females I needed. And then I kept that list for years and would shop for those exact animals. And when I'd find it, check it off the list and build your projects out like that.
Okay. That makes perfect sense. So I think that's one thing that we all hold on one second. Living Wild, thank you for tuning in tonight. Greatly appreciate it. I hope you have a great night.
Thank you, Georgina. We'll see you soon.
But yeah, I think that's one thing that we all kind of, fall into the habit of, is when we're getting into it, we might not have that thought process of where we're going to end up possibly in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And we do start buying, this is pretty, that's pretty. And at the end, you're like, well, I want to get into breeding. Now you're like, well, none of this works towards any of these. And then you've got to restructure everything. So I think that's one thing where if you remotely think or have that thought that one day you would like to breed, take that man's advice right there and draw up a plan and buy the animals that work with it. Because
exactly, like I said, it's the same thing. There's nothing wrong with just buy whatever you think is pretty, and it's, you have some pets and maybe as a hobby you breed a couple of them just for the experience of it. That's perfectly fine. But if you want breeding to be like a part of your life, if you want it to be not even just your business or your job, just something that you do with intentionality, plan the projects first. Otherwise, you end up wasting a lot of time and money buying and selling animals that you're never going to work with. I learned that the hard way.
And I'm throughout me kind of I had a vision of where I wanted to go with the ball pythons, but kind of the same thing though. I found myself having to slightly restructure certain aspects of my collection to work for certain projects. And like you said, you're having to buy new stuff, sell off other stuff, puts you years behind where you should have been if you would have planned it all out in the beginning.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's going to be it for tonight, folks. If nobody has any more questions, I'll give you guys all a minute. I give you guys a couple minutes here to figure out if you want to ask Brian any more questions. Next week, I have Nathan of Infinite Possible Pythons going to be joining me. We're probably both going to be tired because we're vending the day before at Gettysburg Reptile Expo LLC. So everybody, if you are close to Gettysburg or if it's within a couple hours drive, go to Gettysburg Reptile Expo LLC. Stop out, say hi to a whole bunch of us. Danny from DTMG is going to be there. Phil from Finger Snakes is going to be there. Myself, John and Christine from Triforce. A lot of us that are in either me and or people that are in the chat over there will be at that show vending. So stop out, say hi. It's a great show. I highly recommend it. It's probably one of, in my opinion, the best show in PA. I could maybe biased by it, but I really enjoy that show. There's tons of room, not only as someone walking through, but even as a vendor. There's so much room. It's spacious. It's comfortable. It's amazing. Definitely check it out. But we're going to be going over branding and some of the do's and don'ts of branding, what you need, what you don't need. Just going to kind of, I thought having a branding specific live would be a really good idea. So we're going to be talking branding with Nathan because he is the man. Can I sleep on the live? As long as you have Danny answering the questions for you, Nathan, yes, you could sleep on the live. But you got to have Danny there with you, Nathan, if you want to sleep. Like, and I mean physically right there with you. John and Christine says, hope to see you all. Definitely stop by and say hi. Yes. But that'll be on the 19th. On the 26th, I have Ashley and Nikita of Pip Stalkers joining us. On April 2nd, I have John from Inquiline joining us. And then I've got to figure out the rest of April. Obviously, my son's birthday is on the 10th, so I don't know how I'm going to work the 9th. If I'm going to, I got to figure a little bit of stuff out logistics-wise for April. But definitely, there are some people that are on my list to hit up. We might get crazy and get another gecko person out here because I do have a couple of names that popped up here tonight. So everybody in the chat, let me know in the actual comment section on the video. Like, go drop a comment if you would want to see more gecko content because I really enjoyed tonight. I learned a lot. So I greatly thank you on that, Brian. I really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
And everybody, definitely go and check out our sponsors of tonight's episode, please, which would be Nathan of Infinite Possible Pythons and my buddy Chris at S Reptilia. Go check them out. I love these guys. Nathan's got killer stuff. Chris is a one-stop shop for just about everything you can want or need. So definitely check them both out. And Nathan, of course, like I said, for branding needs, hit him up. And Brian, just stay here 1 second. After I end this, I just want to thank you backstage.
Yeah,
everybody, I hope you guys have a great week. This week's video, Wednesday, will be, I think it's pulling clutch number 2. And we did have a clutch hatch here this week. So that video will be coming up with the clutch cutting of that as well. So we're into that season now, everybody. You're going to start seeing fresh babies popping up now. Super excited for this season. We've got visual Xanthics in the works. We've got carpet python clutch in the works. This year's going to be an epic one for the books, and it's only going to get better from here on. But thank you, everybody, for all the love and support. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you next time. Later.